this is something a little different. I sit down with Seth Peribnsen. It's not his real name. His real name is Lester. Well, his first name is. He kind of wants to keep his identity a secret. He's a biohacker, a researcher, and a scientist. He's discovered some things that link fungi to the phenomenon and the control system that we've all heard about. Strap in. This one's a little deep, but hang in there. There's some very cool revelations. Dude, thanks for taking the time to chat, man.
Yeah, sure.
What's going on?
Oh, just hanging out, doing little bits of research like usual. Yeah, so it's endless,
Dude, it's not. It's pretty massive stuff. I mean, from everything you've shared with me, I mean, that's a lot of connecting some dots.
Yeah, and it's like where do you slow down and take the time to actually start writing the papers versus just keep rolling into like the next thing? Because it really is that deep from what I'm seeing so far. It's there's 7 or 8 of us that work really closely on the research side of it. We've got my personal friend I've known for 40 years or so. Mm-hmm. He and I work real close on it. We grew up with a lot of the same health problems too, which is kind of strange. We're from the same area. So that all kind of looped in. So it's he and I primarily. He does a lot of the writing. I just supply a lot of the research like I've talked about.
Yeah.
The wife is really involved with like parts and pieces of it because she was also sick and then also got better. And I've told you some of the stuff about that. Which is really I think that's one of the points I want to kind of go over a little bit while we're chatting here is that I would consider myself a fairly normal dude before December of 21 when this all started rolling through. So I don't know how you want to do this. You want to just start rolling hot?
Yeah, dude. All
right, cool.
Just roll with it, man.
Okay, so
I never planned anything.
So just to fill you in on officially what I do, I'm an independent researcher, self-funded, so I don't have any big grants or anything over my head for people wanting me to tick certain boxes. I'm connected with an institute in Nagaland over in Southeast Asia region, and that's run by somebody I've known for about 30 years. He's a professor at a university. He wants to kind of keep that out of this, but anyway, he's professor at the university that I'm connected with. He and I have been working on this for about 2 years, trying to figure out how to funnel everything in, and figure out who wants to actually read these papers. Have initial peer review. And it's loose peer review. Don't get me wrong; it's not the official full bucket, but at least it's a few set of eyes that can look at what I'm putting forward and make sure I'm not totally, off somewhere in left field. Which is obviously a worry when you're trying to like not rewrite really, but like when you're trying to tap a vein that's been overlooked in, disease immunology. Officially, I basically do research on invasive fungal disease. And a lot of that focuses around, especially Southeast Asia. It's a lot more prevalent. It's just temperature, humidity, those kind of things all factor in, obviously, climate in general. Yeah, so that's the big part of it here. That's how I got hooked up with him. So to go over this whole thing, I'm going to go over to it, and just to, I don't know if we need trigger warnings or anything like that.
No,
I'm going to go over.
Fine.
Okay, cool. So the way that this started, we were in the middle of COVID like everybody else.
Yeah.
And we got pregnant.
Okay.
So happy news in the middle of COVID. We're like, hey, here's some light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. For sure.
And due to some complications that came from my genetics and my wife's genetics, we lost the baby.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's one of those things, it really opened a lot of pieces and parts of this puzzle that no one had really put together for me or my wife over the years. We had kind of a series of satellite symptoms is what I would call them. It's usually what they're called out in medical terminology too, but they don't usually connect those the way that it happened for us. So I'm going to jump into a little experience stuff here. So
yeah, for sure.
We lost the baby, like I say, and that was around mid-September of 21.
Okay.
And, stressful on top of COVID, coming out of that and everything else, work and everything else is, it's all right up here.
Yeah.
So, I had this habit that I had developed after losing the baby, where if I was, upset in the morning, whatever it might be, I would go away to not add extra stress to her.
Right. Okay.
I
Makes
just
sense.
go, just hang out with a cat, do whatever, just do my own thing for a little bit, just, think it out.
Yeah.
And I remember waking up this one morning, and this is where we're going to jump into some experience stuff. And I'm in bed, and kind of have that wave. When you first wake up, I'm like, still that's still here kind of feeling,
Yeah.
with the loss and all that. And I look down, and I'm kind of hazy, just coming out of sleep. I look down towards the end of our bed in the corner of the room, and I felt like somebody was. And this is where it gets really uncomfortable for me.
Mhm.
Like I'm not sure exactly where this would fit for most people,
Right.
but I saw a figure at the end of the
Okay.
bed, my
Okay.
corner, down on this left hand side, and it was huge. It was the entire corner of the room.
Hmm.
Uh, it was bending its neck down to be able to fit in the room, like kind
Ooh.
of down
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
Blue and black robe. I could only see about this much of the face, and it looked
Hmm.
female from what I could tell, very pale. And it just this booming voice, female booming voice in my head, and it said, "Do you want eternal life?" I'm like, okay, I've completely lost it at this point, is what I'm
Right.
thinking. Like I say, before all this happened, I consider myself a
Maybe.
totally normal, maybe a little
Yeah.
bit, there's like
A little
some
bit.
kind of break there.
I don't
So I
know.
wrote it off, I jokingly,
No, I'm
because
just
I'm like,
like answering the question. Like, how do you answer that question? It's like
well, I'll tell you
maybe.
how
I
I
don't
answered that
know.
question. Yeah, I'll tell
Okay.
you how I answered
Okay.
that question actually, because I figured
Yeah.
I'm just having like some kind of break, so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have fun with this anyway. If I'm already there,
Yeah. If
I'm
you're
just gonna
already there,
keep going
just
with a
go
break.
right
Why
over
not?
the edge.
Yep,
Right.
there
Yeah.
we go.
Yeah.
So I just said, not without these two, which is my wife and my cat. I'm like,
Yeah. Okay.
sure, I'll take you up. You want a bargain? This is the bargain.
Right.
Whatever.
There you go.
So
Okay.
fell back asleep, kind of drifted out, whatever, that normal scenario you hear of from people that have that kind of experience.
Yeah. It's just
Just
amazing.
drifted
You heard
back.
a lot of people just fall back asleep or just like, oh,
Yep,
okay. Yeah.
that's
That
what it
just
is.
happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just go
Yeah,
back to
exactly.
bed.
Just go
Like,
back to sleep.
what?
It's almost,
Yeah.
to me, it almost kind of lines up with that thing you hear with people that have a sighting,
Yeah.
where they
Exactly.
have a
Kind of.
sighting, they're looking at it, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, that's not very interesting," and then they
Eh,
walk away. It's like, "What the
yeah.
hell,
Like,
dude?"
whatever.
Anyway,
Nobody gets their phone out. Yeah. Everybody just like,
yeah,
whatever.
and it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen videos of it online. I've had friends tell
Yeah.
me that themselves. Pretty common.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I did here. I
Yeah.
woke up and I was like, "Oh, that was a weird half dream
Hmm.
vision, whatever."
Right.
So about a week later, and this ties in with the habit I had of going downstairs in the mornings. I went
Hmm.
downstairs, just did what I normally do, and I laid back on the couch, fell back asleep for a minute. Just kind of drifted off.
Hmm.
Super early in the morning, like 6:30, 7 o'clock. Wasn't
Hmm.
quite light out, and I am in a similar position, laying there. I look over to the left corner again. This time it's in the corner by the stairwell in our house. Same thing,
Mm.
the same figure. I'm like, what is this? Obviously I'm okay. I'm just having a real problem here.
Yeah.
So, I give it the same answer. The same question came from it, the same voice, the same feeling, all of it.
Hmm.
You want eternal life? I'm like, what is this? What is this, dude? So
Hmm.
I'm like, all right, yeah, sir, same deal. I'm going to give you the same answer. And then the same thing happened.
Fell back
Blipped
asleep.
out, right back to sleep, like nothing happened. Right.
Wow.
So, okay,
Okay.
I'm the second time. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to not think about it too much. I didn't tell my wife about it
Hmm.
immediately until the third visit.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the third
Yeah.
visit was the same thing.
Right.
And I'm back on the couch downstairs, and I'm in a different position. So I'm, they're one of those chase lounge types
Hmm.
couches. So I'm looking this way,
Okay.
and it's still off my left,
It's always to the
kind
left.
of
Okay.
always to the
All
left
right.
for some reason. I don't know what,
Hmm.
no attachment for me as far as detail on that, but whatever. It
Hmm.
was on the left again, and same question,
Right.
female voice booming in my head. Do you want eternal life? I'm like, same answer.
Yep.
Sorry, fell back asleep.
Hmm.
Done. So at that point, I was like, hey, I got to talk to you, my wife, and I pull her aside, and I'm like, I'm having something happening here that's just really
Right.
weird, and I
Right.
feel like I should tell you about it. We're pretty open with that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
We're both experiencers from way, way back. So I
Okay.
had some stuff when I was younger, which we can dive into at some point. But
Right on.
with this, it kind of stopped. That third visit, third question, third answer, done.
Okay.
And then I had about, let's see, it was November. So November 20th, 21st, I think is the date I have in my head here.
Hmm.
Um, I was downstairs again. And this time I was just like, you know what? I'm at the bottom, dude. I can kind of feel I'm at the bottom. Like kind of, I'll just scooped out, between COVID and all this other stuff. I'm
Hmm.
at the bottom. And I'm
Hmm.
like, all right, you know what? I'm going to just throw this out to the universe. I'm going to say, hey, either you come down, not come down, but just show up. Whatever this thing was, I'm just playing with the idea still that I'm just having a mental break, but I'm thinking,
Yep.
okay, I can psych my way out of this.
Right.
And I said, either you come down or come around and take care of some things, or I'm out.
Hmm.
Right. So as soon as I said that and finished that second sentence, it was like somebody clocked me right in the mouth.
Oof.
Like, I'm serious, man. It was like
Hmm.
somebody just punched me. I'm back out, like instantly blacked out. And then I woke up like nothing. I was like, well, that's really weird that happened. I figured it was probably another dream similar to what was happening with these other things. So that's November 21st. And about 6 days later, so just after Thanksgiving,
Hmm.
I had my wife take a look in my throat because it had been a little scratchy. But we hadn't had COVID, hadn't had exposure or anything like that, So
Hmm.
the other stuff was from a different issue.
Hmm.
And she's like, "All right, it looks like you have something going on there. Your throat's scratchy. We're gonna go to the doctors." And I was kind of a jerk at this point, so I was like, "All right, samesies then. Let me
Yeah.
see your
Yeah.
throat. If it's
Yeah.
going on for me, it's probably going on for you. So we'll both go." And that's what happened. So we
Hmm.
call this local hospital and we're like, hey, we want to come in and see you guys, figure out what's going on with our throat. And we go in and we see these two doctors. We met with her doctor first,
Hmm.
and this is the same site, military hospital. And the doctor says, okay, look, I don't think you guys have what you think you have, because we thought thrush. We were like, okay,
Hmm. Oh
it's
yeah.
something
Okay. Yeah.
fungal,
Right.
kind of
Hmm.
thrushy, and that's pretty common, especially with long COVID. By the
Hmm.
way,
Okay.
long COVID, you'll see that kind of thing come up. There's like co-infection issues and stuff you can find out there.
Gotcha.
So the doctor looks at both of us and says, all right, I'm going to give you 10 days of this antifungal.
All right.
Nystatin. Nystatin, you've probably seen it if you have kids or anything like that around. It's the yellow liquidy stuff. It tastes like
Okay.
bananas or whatever the heck they flavor it like. So he sends us home. Now, bear in mind, I've had health issues my entire life
Hmm.
up to this point. So this is actually December. I think our appointment ended up being December 10th of 21. And I was born with bronchial pneumonia, so I had a bunch of fungal related issues. I didn't know this at the time, nor did my doctors. They did kind of like work with bits and pieces, but
Hmm.
it's that satellite thing. No one really drills it all together until this other doctor. So I had gone to her visit with her. Doctor
Hmm.
set us both up with a solution, the nystatin stuff. Started
Right.
taking it, and I had let's see, meibomian gland dysfunction, which is a dry eye issue. For about 7 years at this point, 8 years, my optometrists have been trying to figure it out with me for that whole time period.
Right.
I had other things that were going on, like dental issues you hear about with COVID, but
Hmm.
mine were much further reaching back in my
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
But again, the doctors could never figure out exactly why. It's like good maintenance, good care on my end, but
Right.
always like kind of deteriorating for no good reason. I'm like, all
Hmm.
right, it's genetic, obviously. So my doctors would tell me it's genetic.
Right.
So um, I wake up the first morning after taking this nystatin, and my MGD, this dry eye issue that I have, is gone.
Just one
Like,
day. Just taking
gone.
that stuff for one
Just
day.
overnight. And I only took
Wow.
like a half a course. I only took 2 doses out of the 4 for that day.
Hmm.
And I woke up, and that was the first thing I could think to say to my wife is, my eye problem's gone. Like, I
Wow.
was literally like, it was like heading for macular degen,
Hmm.
a lot of other issues that happen because you basically, with meibomian gland dysfunction, you don't have the oil layer, the
Okay.
lipid
Okay.
layer in
Yeah.
your eye
Yeah. Hmm.
fluid. So your eyes just constantly dry out. That's why you get the dry
Right.
eye issues. But that was
Gotcha.
gone.
Wow.
And then 3 days later, so this is just still on nystatin. So third or fourth day out, I noticed that my this side of my jaw, which had really been a problem during COVID and even before that, some issues I had back here, headed towards needing an emergency root canal.
Oof.
Right. So this is
Ugh.
November of 21. So I'd say about a week before the couch thing where I was like, hey, come down and
Yeah.
fix this or whatever.
Right.
I had this appointment where the doctor had actually written me a recommendation, said you have something going on. You need an emergency root canal. And those are serious business. So I'd
Right.
had it scheduled and all ready to go and get it done. The third day of this nystatin, the pain was completely gone, John.
Whoa,
No pain
dude.
at all. And I'm like, all right. So at this point, I'm like, something weird's happening here.
Yeah. I'm
I had
dying
other
or
things. Yeah, right. This is the end. I'm clocking
what?
out, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. This is
systems are
it.
shutting down and
I
we're
feel
done.
great and I'm
Yeah,
dead.
it's like, I can run a marathon right now, which is
Yeah.
impossible for me in the
Yeah.
past, bronchial
Yeah.
pneumonia all my
Yeah.
life and all that crap. So yeah, I get thinking about it. I'm like, all right, so my brain is starting to clear out. That's the other thing too, is I like all my cognitive issues from like potential COVID
Mhm.
related stuff that might have popped up, gone. And some of those actually trace all the way back into childhood because of
So
these
this is
issues I
like day
had.
4 or like,
Day
did you take
four.
the,
Day
that's,
four.
no,
Yep, and it's
wow.
just nice that nothing fancy, dude. It's just literally like bog standard. This is what they give your 3 or 4 year old when they have a thrush issue. That's what it
Wow.
is.
Okay.
So fourth
You
day,
had never
that
taken this before, right? Like this is not something that was
I
in your
have to tell
catalog of
you,
anything,
okay, so you and I have talked about this quite a bit,
Yeah, yeah.
privately, and
Right,
and
right.
you know where my work is.
Mhm.
I dot my I's, cross my T's. I've shown you
Yep.
lots of stuff related to it, and it's all pretty
Yeah, yeah.
solid.
Right,
And if
right,
I
right.
if it's not solid for me, like I say, I check it out with you or somebody else. In general, I just throw it to other people and say, hey, what do you think about this?
Right.
So I never had any idea, honestly, that guys could even get fungal infections like that.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
I knew that there were at this point in my history of working with biology and other things, I knew friends and whatnot that had immunocompromised situations. So
hmm
friends of mine with HIV, for example, things like that. Other people I knew that had endocrine issues that would
hmm
lead to autoimmune disorders and whatnot. I know that they could acquire these fungal infections that were really drastic, but usually it's like you see that in the end stages of these infections when people
Mm.
are, like you say, kind of like
On the way
they're
out,
really on
right.
their way out, right?
Yeah, right.
So I've seen that, but I didn't know it could happen to someone who was considered immunocompetent, which is
Mm.
where I sat.
Okay.
And bear in mind, all this stuff, just for the audience out there, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a doctor, but I will say that do your own research. There's a
Mhm.
lot of points and pieces you can kind of connect if you know what you're looking at, um, as some people in phenomenon land would say.
Mhm.
So the thing about it for me is that I realized I needed to get some kind of clinical documentation,
Right.
or
Yeah.
nobody was going to believe what the fuck I was saying.
Oh, so I
So
want to stop you for one second
yeah, of
because
course,
something you said a little bit ago that kind of just I
yeah,
wanted to bring up is that you say you went to a military doctor.
yeah.
So you were your wife in the military, or is it just happened to be like that's
Just
where you
happens.
could get?
Well, I've got a family history with the military. I was
Okay.
not in myself. Again, it actually, surprisingly enough, my issues with getting into the military come back to issues I had that were endocrine issues from APSID, or APS1 is what they used to call APS 123 is the other term
Mhm.
you'll hear.
Okay.
So it was just, yeah, just random. It's
Okay.
what happened to be closest. They had availability. It wasn't
Gotcha.
like
Gotcha. I just
yeah, I
wasn't
didn't have
like
to,
you didn't know if you're like your
no
wife was in the
ID
special
card or anything.
forces or
No,
something. And
no, no, no. I do have
all right.
connections, but not directly in our household. So yeah, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yep. So,
Just
but
wanted to clear that up to make sure they didn't give you something magical that they don't give everybody else, and it was just
no,
an
these
aside.
are
Gotcha,
totally standard. I mean,
gotcha.
it's odd that they knew this,
hmm
which is really what threw a flag for me, because
Right.
and I'll get to this in a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the second doctor that I met with is where
Right.
things really started taking off. So I get this fourth day of nystatin through me, and I notice that this is going away. And we
hmm
had my appointment that next day, so I didn't have
Okay.
time to get everything lined up with everybody. But I did call the dentist office and I said, "Hey, I've got an appointment tomorrow, but I want to come see you guys like in a day or two here, um, figure out what's going
hmm
on with my face." And this is right before Christmas and everything else. So right before the holiday, they're jammed right out. Um, so I call them, get the appointment set up,
hmm
and then I go to my appointment at the military hospital. And
hmm
this other doctor, I had sent her pictures of what was going on in my, back of my throat area before we had seen the first doctor,
Right.
and she had time to look at it. And I said, "Hey, I think that this might be something like candidiasis, whatever." She and I were
hmm
chatting back and forth. She's like, Actually, I think it's cryptococcosis." I'm like, what's that word?"
Right.
That's
Right.
the
Yeah.
point I was
Yeah.
at with this, my
Yeah.
knowledge base at that time.
Yeah.
So she's like,
And
"Look,
trust
it's
me,
another."
I had to Google all this stuff too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, and that's how it is with this. They don't
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about this stuff
Nobody.
that loudly. It's
You don't
like,
hear about that stuff, right?
no, it's like viruses and bacteria are the hot ticket.
hmm
So that's where it seems like most of the attention goes for those kind of things.
Right.
Um, but she brings me into the office and she says, "Hey, I know what your problem is. This is cryptococcosis. It's not
Mm.
regular thrush like you would think, candida. So we're going to give you fluconazole.
Okay.
Diflucan is the other term you'll hear for it. That's the commercial word, I believe, is diflucan, and that is an antifungal as well. Now, the difference being nystatin is a different type of antifungal approach.
Okay.
Um, this is an azole, so fluconazole. So
Okay. Okay.
triazole, azole class drugs, those are antifungals that they're used for other things too, like antihelminthics and stuff like that, like parasites.
Okay.
But that should throw a flag for you, actually. But these things work on sterols, basically processing in the fungi. They keep them from extending parts of their processes like growing their cells and whatnot. So it's almost like when it goes to split, if you could think of it being trapped inside that original cell without being able to split. That's what
Okay,
azoles
gotcha.
do. They
Okay.
keep it from extending that endoplasmic reticulum area, and extending the cell out and breaking it off or becoming a hyphenation, either or. So
So it can't extend it. It basically dies at that point because it can't
yep,
grow. And okay,
yep,
got it.
exactly.
Okay.
So they just die in
Okay.
their little trap there. Yeah, exactly. And our cells don't use ergosterol, which is what, well, they primarily don't use ergosterol, which is what the fungi use to do their work for growth.
Okay.
We use other type of sterols. But so she's looking at this and says, I'm going to put you on 10 days of this. Now,
So
bear in
did she
mind,
do like a swab or anything? I mean, is there any way to test for this? None of that.
there
Just for
are
the
ways to
visual. Like,
test. Yeah, there
okay.
are ways to test. I mean, I
But at
guess
this point, it's just you're just like,
she
okay, I know
knew
what this is.
it was
Okay,
it was
got it.
that to her it was that obvious. Now, bear in
Okay.
mind, I had been dealing with all these issues, these other issues, my whole life, from
And she knew
born
you were on the
up
4 days
until now.
or up until that point of the other stuff as well, right?
Yeah,
The
and here's the
okay,
here's the
yeah,
weird
yeah.
part about that. She said, even though you've been on that for 4 days, don't worry about it. Just start the 10-day course of this and run through it.
And stop. So you
Okay.
stopped the other one though, right? I mean,
Yep.
that was it.
Yep. Stop
Okay.
the nystatin. My
Okay.
wife kept going with a nystatin, and I just moved on to the fluconazole.
Gotcha.
Usually, if you have a fungal infection and you go to the doctor for it, for whatever reason it might be, and they do prescribe fluconazole, it's usually like 1 or 2 or 3 days, John.
Okay.
This is
That's it.
10,
It's like these
10,
like
10
are these
flat.
like massive
They're like
quantities or
little,
little tiny
they're
little
little
things?
tiny. Yeah, it's like
Okay.
100
Okay.
milligram. 100
Okay.
milligram dose is all it takes.
Ooh.
It's a cool compound too, because it kind of tricks the fungi into thinking that it's a lactic chemical, which is what it really uses to thrive on a lot of the fronts that it
So
uses
it's like
against us. Tricks
tracks
it,
it
yeah, tricks it, yeah. And then it just snares it all up in the mitochondria and the cytochromes. So anyway, she's given me this new 10-day course, and
yeah.
I told her, hey, my joint pain is gone, like my arthritis that I was
Right.
developing at 45,
Mm.
gone. All this other stuff I told her, she's like, yeah, that should happen. Like, what are you talking about? That should happen. Like, no one's
Right.
ever said that to me.
Right.
She's like,
Right.
don't worry about it. She's like, could I check a couple other things on you? And I'm like, sure. She's like, you mentioned that you have a couple spots on your back that you were concerned with. Can I, lift your shirt up? Let me take a look. So I do. And I had these little discoid kind of patches, like you would think ringwormish, maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But my family had a history of psoriasis, so I just wrote it off as like a small psoriasis, eczema kind of thing, whatever it
Mm.
might be, family history in there, genetics again. Um, and she's like, "Oh, and this is the weirdest part, man, because I told her my eyes straightened out, my
Mm.
tooth pain was gone, all these things like my confusion stuff was gone, all those other weird parts of the cognitive issues were gone." And she's like,
Mm.
"Yeah, that should happen." And then start taking this, and you'll see even more things turn around. And when she saw those spots on my back, I'm not even kidding, man. She started jumping up and down like out of happiness. She's
Why?
like, "I'm so glad." She had to stop herself, and then she said, "Oh wait, I shouldn't say that to a patient." But I'm going to anyway. I'm so glad those are there because this 10 days will take care of every problem you've had in your life.
Whoa. What?
I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, at this point, like I say, I'm still a normal in my
Eh,
mind. Like,
eh,
processing and functioning, I'm a pretty normal dude. I'm not doing what I'm doing now with this stuff. Which is really weird, but we can talk about
mm.
that in a second too.
Yeah.
So all these things start dropping away even further. So after the couple days of fluconazole, I do have my appointment with that dentist that
Right.
I had given me the original recommendation, and he starts poking around. Now, here's the weird thing about this: he cleared his office like two or
Okay.
3 days before Christmas on a Friday.
Weird.
I called. I made sure my appointment was good. He's like, "Yep. When you get here, go to the side door. Right, go to the side door. All this other stuff. So I go and I check in. There's
Did you
one
tell
other
him ahead of
person.
time that you thought it was cleared up?
Well, I told him generally what happened. I said, "Hey, we got an official candidiasis diagnosis, cryptococcosis diagnosis." He's like, "Oh yeah, okay, well yeah, you got to come on in. We'll take a look." Because I told him, I said, I feel like my root canal's not going to be necessary. There's no pain there anymore.
Whoa.
So I get there, and like I say, the office is completely cleared, and it's not like late in the evening. He scheduled my appointment for like 2:30 in the afternoon.
Weird.
They're open until 5 on Friday. Nobody was there besides the receptionist, him and his assistant, and the receptionist was only there for like 5 minutes tops. And then there was one person in the lobby who was just there for records. She picked her records up, and like when he came out of the back, my doctor, like I started talking to him, he's like, no, no, wait, no, no,
Mm,
like
mm.
shushing me. I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I get in there with him and his assistant, and she sits me down, and I start explaining to her what had happened. She asked me a couple of questions, like she's, "Oh, I heard you had a fungal infection of some kind, and this and this and this happened." I'm like, "Yeah," and now
Mhm.
nothing hurts. I'm like, nothing hurts, like in my anywhere in my head. I had problems right up to the point that I had seen them maybe 3 weeks before that.
Right.
And he comes in the room after settling everything up, and he starts poking around with instruments, tools, whatever else, and he's like, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. You don't need a root canal anymore." What are you talking about, man? I'm like, all I do is take antifungals. He's like, yeah. He didn't tell me why. This is the thing that really bugged me about it. He didn't tell me why. So I'm like, all right. I obviously need to start researching this myself. Start talking to the doctor more
He
over
was
at the
just like,
military
cool,
hospital.
thanks, see ya.
Yep,
Like that
yep,
was
and
it.
shoot
Wow.
me out the door. And he said the creepiest thing too when I left. He said, "Good luck on your journey."
What the hell does that mean?
I don't know, but I heard it from no less than 3 doctors during this process.
Good luck on your journey.
Good luck on your journey. I'm like, I'm not on a journey, dude. I'm taking antifungals. Okay, seriously. But
It's not like I'm taking DMT, bro.
yeah, well, we'll get to that in a second too. But the thing about it for me is that these guys, like, no one has mentioned this to me at any point up until this, December 21, getting through all this stuff, and I'm checking in with the doctors, getting my records, making sure it's all in there.
Mhm, mhm.
And it gets to, things keep dropping away while I'm doing the next, the consecutive days of fluconazole. I
Yeah.
get to the fifth or sixth day. Now, when I say that I had a lot of birth issues that were related to this, I was born with bronchial pneumonia. I had the like full skin, like fungal infection blowout when I was like,
Mm,
this big. All kinds of problems, and I had my legs were actually twisted inward,
mhm, mhm.
which took braces to twist outward, which is another thing. It's like a growth issue that happens when you have a lot of fungal infections in the womb. It'll
Gotcha.
actually cause issues with formation of limbs and such. And that
Mhm.
happened to me on the lower limbs. So I wore braces the first 2 years of my life to get my legs turned the other direction. And I also was born with murmur
Mm.
up in my upper left. So upper left side here. And this is where it gets really weird. So my neuropathy, like the nerve pain from wearing those braces the first 2 years, had chased me my whole life, John. And that was gone. Day
Mhm.
4 of fluconazole, completely gone. I'm born with it, basically. And
Wow.
I'm calling this doctor at the military hospital, being like, look, like I was checking in daily because I was like, why is all this stuff happening? Like
Mhm,
somebody's got to be
mhm.
able to tell me why, not just here's the thing to fix it. Um, and her office just keeps saying the same thing. Oh yeah, we expected that. Yep, we expected that. Yep, that's exactly how it should go. I'm like, okay, this is not giving me any satisfaction here for what's happening with my body.
Right.
So I get to day 6 in the evening, and I felt really weird, like in the chest. I was like, I don't know, like I've had cardiac issues my whole life off and on, like arrhythmias because of the murmur and all the other complications that were gummed up in there during
Mm.
development in the womb. I get to day 6 though, and I'm laying there, and I start feeling like a twitch of some kind all up in here. I'm like, oh, I'm probably getting ready to kick out here. Something weird's
Yeah,
happening.
right.
Like,
This is where
but
it
you don't
comes, right?
think that, right? But you don't think, hey, I'm taking
Yeah,
antifungals. This is going to be the end for me. It's like, okay.
right.
So, and I told Tilly, I'm like, you keep an eye on me for a minute because I don't know what's going on right now. My chest is weird. I'm breathing heavy and stuff. And
Oh no.
it sounds dumb. The only thing I could think to do, John, was push-ups, like in place. So I start doing like push-ups or like, whatever I could do to keep myself like conscious. Basically, what I was
Wow.
trying to do.
Do you feel like you're blacking
Um,
out? Like you feel like you were going out?
Kind of, sorta.
Yeah.
Not like the seeing stars kind of
Yeah.
blackout, but definitely like something weird's happening, like blood flow wise and whatnot.
Whoa. Whoa.
And my wife, she's keeping an eye on me, and she said, and now bear in mind, I did black out.
Mm.
So I got to the point where I was like, just push up, push up, push up, and I just blacked
Passed
out.
out.
Done,
Yeah.
gone, completely gone. And I thought I was gone for days, dude. I'm not kidding. I thought I was out for a week. I was like, I must be in the hospital already or something, all racked up. And I wake back up. I'm still in my bed.
Mm.
And my wife is like, "Are you okay? That was really weird." Like, she's like, "I don't know what happened, but you like passed out and you just made this noise, like the ultimate sigh, and then just started breathing completely normal. And
Hmm.
you were out for like, here's the kicker. She said you were out for like 30 seconds.
Hmm. And you thought it was like 3 years.
Oh yeah, dude. And here's the thing is I woke up and I sat up and I'm like, I think my murmur's gone. My murmur that I was born with, a congenital abnormality,
Gone.
gone.
What the
So of
fuck?
course I call the doctor and I'm like,
Yeah.
look, I know you know
Yeah.
about this murmur. My doctor that I was born to knew
Mhm.
about this murmur all the way back. What happened?
Right. Right.
No answer besides, oh, we expected that. And what I said to them at that point, I said, look, I'm on day 6 of this medication. I can tell that there's like miles to go.
Hmm.
If this is taking care of a birth issue for me, I know I've got a lot of work ahead of me. And they're like, okay, look, we like you. You're a great patient, but we're not prescribing you because my findings up at that point was that it was average 6 months antifungals when you had the level of involvement that I had with fungal disease. So I call them and I'm like, hey, it
Oh.
looks like going by what they're saying online for all these other cases that look similar to mine, I need like 6 months of this stuff. And they're like,
Right.
no, we're not doing that. We're not giving you 6 months of fluconazole. Sorry, man. So they basically said, good luck. They kind of booted it out the door. And I was like, well, all right, I knew like my core, like my physical response to this stuff. I knew that I had something else going on. One thing I also meant to mention earlier is that by the end of the 10 days of fluconazole, so 4 days of Nystat, 10 days of fluconazole,
Yeah.
I managed to drop like 25, 30 pounds.
Holy shit.
And I didn't, dude, I was not
In
working
like
out.
two
I was doing
weeks.
2 weeks just sitting there. And it was all this stuff. It was all somehow, it was like it had been with me for I don't know how long for me to drop
Wow.
that much weight that
Were you
quickly.
like
But it
getting
was,
sick? Were you like, did you have the shits? Were you throwing up? Did you have like none of
oh,
that,
well, yeah, I
huh?
had the shits for sure. Yeah, but no
Yeah.
throwing
Yeah.
up. Throwing
Huh.
up didn't come until later. And so what happened here is I started looking at things that were natural
Mm-hmm.
that would work as a proper antifungal because they're out there. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
write stuff off in those categories. It's actually like half of my work is identifying like phytocompounds,
Mm-hmm.
amino acids, things like that can work against invasive fungal disease. Because particularly with the institute over in Naga, the resources are extremely limited. In most situations, most regions over there, so you have to have alternate options. You can't
Right. Right.
rely on, RX.
Pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't rely on that. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
find things that are either readily produced, easily produced, or they're sometimes right around the villages and whatnot that are in these areas.
That's cool.
A lot of like shaman type
Yeah. Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
the ones that know the
The
local outlay of the
natural.
plants and natural
Yeah.
compounds that they've
Yeah.
used for centuries, thousands of years in these regions, and that's the thing that fixes that problem. They just know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I kind of started doing the same thing. And I started looking at, okay, what are these antifungal compounds that people are using?
Mm-hmm.
N-acetylcysteine came up. Everyone knows NAC these days for the most part. That's a big,
Mm-hmm.
big one.
Yeah.
That's a biofilm interrupter breaker, whatever you want to say there. And that's in the data too. And we found smaller things that were able to be used, like carvacrol, which comes from oregano oil.
Okay.
It's a slaughterhouse for invasive fungi. So there's a bunch of these things that we started finding, and
Right.
I would find one, and because it's not just me taking it, it's me and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, it was a couple friends that had seen my turnaround that were like, "What the hell happened to you?" And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what it was, but this is what happened." And they're like, "Okay, let us help you look at it." And that's
Mm-hmm.
where this whole ball started rolling.
Right.
And I started noticing these trends where the antifungal compounds were also causing autophagy and mitophagy in most cases, or I should say, or not and or mitophagy. So, it's similar to when you fast. I do a long fast, and your body starts cleaning out cells that are
Gotcha.
bad, and it can start taking care of some real bad issues.
Thus
That's
the
what was happening.
diarrhea and the
Yeah,
shit.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I started tracking these down, and I started basically like putting them through my system first
Mm-hmm.
to see what kind of response my body had. And somehow, after that first 14 or 14, 15 days of antifungals, I was tuned enough that quickly to my own biology that I was like, all right, I can tell when something's actually having an impact here. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just placebo. I can feel the differences that are happening. I can actually see them.
So
I've
when
got this.
let me ask
Yeah.
you this: like when you stop taking the prescribed uh, regimen of that, did
Mhm.
you have any negative effects? As far as did you go, oh shit, I feel like I'm reverting back to
No,
any of
no,
your none of your
that's
ailments
nothing
decided to
came
come
back.
back? Okay, okay, that
Not
was
at
one of the
all.
questions
Not
where
at
it was
all.
just like if you were on it, you're okay, but if you got off of it, did it? You know?
Yeah, it does maintain. That's the
Okay,
odd part for
okay,
me. It did maintain, and it does for
gotcha.
everyone else that's in this little circle that I've got. I should explain that too. So
Yeah.
I do the research stuff as my primary gig, kind of dealing with
Hmm.
my I call him my boss, but it's a little looser than that. But
Hmm.
over at the institute and at the place in Norway there. But with with the bigger pieces of this, I've basically taken my information and the way that I gather it and started sharing it online with a few people, and then that kind of grew, and more people caught on, and
Hmm.
then just that kind of snowballed.
Hmm.
So we kind of flip a lot of research back and forth. There's a group of about probably I'd guess 300 to 400 of us right
Wow.
now
Okay.
that do this. None of us are attached. I mean, I'm attached to the University Institute officially, but that's separate work from what I'm doing with this other stuff.
Hmm.
We all started researching though, like what antifungal compounds are out there, because what happened is like my best friend, my boss actually, and a few other people that were asking me these questions about what happened to you, like what turnaround happened, like why are you so different now?
Hmm.
And even that's what I'm saying, even people that knew me for like 20, 30, 40 years could see this immediate difference. I said, well, it's just this fungi, these fungi. And they're
Hmm.
like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, this is what I'm doing now. If you're interested, go read about it and see if it affects you too, because no one ever told me this is what was affecting me.
Right.
And then they started having the same turnarounds, John,
Wow.
back to back to back. So it went from me knowing these people personally to an extended group of us
Hmm.
online that were
Hmm.
sharing information back and forth. A bunch of people got together and put this document together that's been floating around, which I only have like a hand, like I say, on the some of the research ends, like the citations and stuff they're using. I kind of supplied some of those articles to them,
Right.
and put some history together. And that kind of became this thing that it got termed cosmic death
Cosmic death
fungus.
fungus.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
got to say it. I have to say it out loud at least once. But the cosmic death fungus thing, which I do chuckle because, but it's this kind of the guys that did that, they went for kind of a catchier name because of where they were
Yeah.
aiming the target. And I
Yeah.
understand. I'm not a huge guy on social media. I'm sure you can tell from the way I run my Twitter account. I'm a bonehead when it comes to social media, man. I'm not
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't I don't
No.
I don't deal well with trolls. I respond to a troll like a troll. Those
Yeah.
kind of things.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
like threw it out there. These guys know how to run the show on that end, and that's what they've been doing. Um,
Yeah.
so it kept stacking up, and
Right.
online we started seeing reports start coming in of people that were like, well, what is this? Like, what are you guys even talking about? We caught a lot of static at first,
Oh, I'm sure.
floating around these forums that I don't even know much about them. These guys pointed me to where these threads were happening. They're like, hey, you should go chime in. You're the guy that brought this to us. So go jump in, start saying some stuff. And I was like, all right,
Right.
I
Right.
don't usually do that, but sure, whatever, dude. Like I have wicked bad social anxiety usually. So I did. I started getting in there and saying, hey, this is what I found. I think you guys, if you want to look further, here's some resources, and eventually ended up kind of forming what my boss termed like an open source research group.
Okay.
Is basically what he sees it as, what he bills it as. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
separate from everything else I do for actually like what I would submit in a paper,
Right.
because I basically do narrative review.
Hmm.
I've got 2 or 3 in the pipeline right now over there at the institute and university, so that's kind of chugging along. Those are related to things like Alzheimer's, cancer, and a couple other things, which I'll be sure to circle back around and share with you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the so these guys are all going through this process alongside us, and it was laughable at first. It was like, okay, no one told us this could just be one thing, a fungus. And I happened to early on, I happened to have access to this nurse, 30-year nurse, who I ran all this stuff by, and she's like, it's funny you're talking to me about all this stuff because everything that you found on your own after the doctors dusted you are the things that we were looking at to try and help people along the way when COVID first started setting in.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's where I kind of tie in a little bit to this because I know, Britain, you and I first started talking. There was a couple different papers that I was reading about trying to kill the COVID spike variant in the human body, right? And a couple of things that I was reading, and I think I spoke to you about this was NAC and bromelain, right?
yeah,
And there was
sure.
like some massive studies done about that, and I think China and somewhere else in Japan, I think, or Asia, somewhere over there, but it was like just those two, just NAC and bromelain, and it was like a month course of that would just completely destroy the COVID-2 spike protein in the human body. Also, and it was saying too that if you had the vaccination at some point and you still had the spike protein from that, it would actually rip it out of your body as well. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's a lot of the research I was reading. Maybe not. I mean,
Well,
but if it was in your body, it would blow it up, right? So I was like, okay, cool. Listen, I'm just going to take it for like just to see what happens, right? Because what's the worst that can happen? It's going to give me the shits,
right, yeah,
whatever, right?
right, yeah, totally,
So I started taking it, and I was like, this is like during COVID, right? Towards the end, until the end of whatever you want to talk about before everything started easing up.
right.
And I had allergies my entire life, like since a little kid, right? Like poke you with a stick, figure out what's like every spring, every fall, like in the winter I'm allergic to fucking oak pollen, which pollinates in the winter, so you can't get away from the shit. So like,
Like
every season,
endless cycle, yeah.
endless
Oh, yeah.
cycle for me, right? And so like this spring, when the spring came up, usually I'm like, all right, I'm getting ready, man. I need Flonase by the gallon. I need, Advil cold and sinus on the ready. I need all this shit, and like I was just taking the, NAC and the bromelain. I haven't taken anything, man. I won't even sneeze anymore. I
Yeah.
don't know I don't know what the fuck the deal is.
Well,
Just those two things, right? They're not, I mean, I think I told you about that, but I'm like, dude, there's no way. I'm like, this is like, I didn't even equate that to that. I was like trying to, do the thing with COVID, right? Like I didn't want COVID. I didn't want to catch it. I didn't want it in my body. I wanted to destroy it if it was in my body. So like an ancillary thing was like my allergies I've had since I was born, and bizarre, right? So I'm like, well, shit, then I started doing way more research into it. Like, man, it just kind of basically repairs your DNA.
Yes, yeah, that's a big aspect of what we're doing. Actually, it's funny you bring that up because that's one of the keys uh, that we have figured out is happening under the hood.
Yeah.
Is that and one side note, like I had all those problems too, the sinusitis and the rhinosinusitis, whatever,
Yeah.
I can breathe out of both nostrils now, man. Like, I mean, for me,
Amazing,
that's oh yeah, it's a huge win. You know what I mean? So, which is funny because almost everyone that has chased this alongside us says the same thing. They're like, my nose used to be always like one nostril, other nostril, like flip back and forth. I think that's a common thought process for most people. Guess what's not supposed to be happening? So yeah, it's a funny thing with the NAC. You get into these biofilm situations,
right?
And even so early on, I started working with this person who's a geneticist. That she studies COVID now, but she was studying Cryptococcus and some other things beforehand, and I hadn't been in touch with her for a decade and a half. And I hit her up out of the blue, and I was like, "Hey, I got to talk to you. Like, I know you're doing all this genetics work and everything else out there at the university she's at." And I said, what's your thought on like biofilm related to fungal production, like invasive fungi? She's like, nah, doesn't happen. Doesn't happen.
Okay, gotcha.
And I was like, that's no, like it didn't sit right. I was like, look, I know that you're the PhD in the box here, but I'm not feeling comfortable with what you just gave me for an answer, because that feels like the rubber stamp you would get from the medical community in general. Not to knock the whole party, but it's just one of those things. You do get kind of that rubber stamp response a lot of the times. Like if they don't understand what it is, aren't trained for it, they're just going to give you a pill and kick you down the road. Right. So I didn't give up. I stuck with it. I started digging more and more on like why would these compounds be tied to both an antifungal effect and like autophagy, mitophagy, and all these other repairs that are happening in my body. And like you just said, it turns out that a lot of these components are repairing your genetics under the hood. But when we started really putting the data together on my end for a bunch of the research we have together right now, we started seeing that if you're able to extricate these fungi and keep them at bay, so we don't really have the standard resistance concerns because of the way that we've been attacking all this stuff on our end, and again, DYOR obviously, but for what we have found, there's not really a resistance capability to the compounds that we're using versus like a regular RX type antifungal. You're going to run into resistance issues usually, is what that's the common thought process out there.
Because it'll build up immunity at some point, and
Yep, starts
right,
kind of
okay,
seeing what you're throwing at it, and it starts like, it can do a lot of weird
adapting,
stuff. The
right?
biofilm that it generates, which it does generate, by the way, just to go back to that for a second, they do
Yeah.
generate biofilm. They are proven to do that now, which has been in the data for a long time. Just again, no one thinks about it. They don't look in that direction for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
But between that biofilm generation and a couple of other things that they're doing, you can actually avoid the resistance issues if you use the right compounds, is what we're finding in the data, and both now with self-testing. I would say I consider myself kind of a biohacker
Okay.
loosely,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I'm checking these compounds out
Mm-hmm.
on paper,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll get a hold of them, and they end up fitting the bill for what I'm trying to do,
Right.
which is keep fungi at bay. And then we've got some other things we're doing with the genetic repair side, where we're trying to basically keep them at bay long enough that, especially in a case like mine. So I should explain APESID a little bit when we go into this section. APESID basically means you don't really have immune defense against fungal infections. There's a lot of other
Okay.
things that kind of piggyback off that, but it all roots from the fungal side of it. APESID, the C in there is actually candidiasis.
Mm.
So there you go. So candida rearing its head again, but it does a bunch of things with like helper cell, like T
Okay.
cell dysfunctions,
Mm-hmm.
not responding correctly, over responding, whatever it might be. So the idea is that you've got this constant fight, and one of the guys that I work with has made a pretty good example of this. Let's say you have um, what's called, well, you have base excision and nucleotide excision repairs are
Okay.
kind of how your genetics or your code kind of checks itself, for like a quick explanation here.
Mm-hmm.
That process can get messed with, obviously, along the way, because a lot of pathogens and other things environmentally are chipping away at your code. That's what they do, particularly pathogens. And these fungi are really, really good at it. They aim for let's see, GCAT. They aim for guanine mostly. So a lot of the guanine related processes in your genetics get affected by these fungi. It's easy. Somehow it's just the easiest one that they like to hit with oxidation, cuts it up, causes an issue, a lesion basically, and then you have an error in your genetics. Your body
Ah.
should roughly be able to repair some of those. That's the whole idea of having base excision repair, nucleotide excision repair, and so on. But if you're constantly fighting, let's say you have 100,000 events, this is how my buddy talks about it. If you have 100,000 events in a day that are attacking your
Mm.
genome, and then you've only got, let's say, 90,000 slots, so to speak, that you can repair because of this basic nucleotide excision repair. And I'm just giving rough numbers. This is nowhere near the
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
data. But
Yeah.
you're way up here and here. So you might be able to keep up with some of those, but
But
it's
not all of
eventually
them.
going to be keeping that 10 extra against you and winding you down over time. If you can bring that 100,000 oxidative event number down, at least related to the pathogen side of it, then you've got extra stores to start doing more repairs, cross checks, whatever you got to say.
Right. Right.
So that's what we're kind of seeing now. And I've been talking with the geneticist from out west, and she brought it up the other day. She's like, "Look, I think you're way past the stage of like just removing fungi from your body and having that be the thing that's happening." She's like, "You're in
Yeah.
some really deep repair that I don't know if we've seen before."
Hmm.
That's her take.
Wow.
She's the one that knows that way more than I do, so I leave that in her box. But she's telling me basically at this point that she's seeing dramatic changes from things that are happening just to me physically, without the rest of the reports in the bucket,
Right.
that are shouldn't be happening. Basically,
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
it's so this all leads to us finding this huge stack of issues that no one really talks about. And
Mm-hmm.
it got this ball rolling in my head. For obviously, I'm watching all these people get better, firsthand, that I know personally, and then all these
Right.
reports online just
Mm-hmm.
keep coming in and over and over and over. And we're like 18 months, 2 years now, roughly, for the
Mm-hmm.
online part of this. Those guys set up, got rolling.
Yeah.
So I started thinking more like, what could this possibly be? And I was reading through just random stuff on Reddit, completely unrelated to anything I was doing for research. And I stumbled upon this article talking about, we're okay to name drop here, huh?
Yeah. Talk
Okay.
about your.
Our friend Lou Elizondo
Oh,
pops up. And it
Lou.
pops up, yeah, and it pops up that he and this other gentleman that I have a lot of respect for work wise, and Gary Nolan, have
Mm-hmm.
been looking at certain things related to, and bear with me now, I had never heard the term phenomenon
Right. There you go.
up until this point.
evidence of a non-human intelligence being on Earth. And his response was,
so if we're trying to find some sort of marker, chances are you're not going to find it buried in the earth unless it only happened maybe the last 5,000 years ago or so.
he then posed the challenge to the host to come up with a mechanism that would survive the sands of time, which is a very daunting task for even the most incredible of human accomplishments. But what could he do to make sure that there was proof 100,000 years from now on Earth that would provide evidence to future intelligences that we were here? Lou then flipped the question around and asked how would we as humanity recognize signs of an advanced ancient civilization from 100,000 years ago?
What would last long enough for us to go back and say, wow, this is an indicator of alien life on this planet 100,000 years ago? What would you have to do to achieve that, to accomplish that? It's a lot harder than one might think. And then again, would you recognize it? One might say, well, DNA is a perfect example. If you wanted to do something that was enduring for humanity, that we could look back 100,000 years ago and say, yes, that was absolutely manipulated by an intelligent life form. Well, deoxyribonucleic acid may be one way to do it. You can put coding and sequencing in there that will perpetuate over time, and yes, you'll have some degradation over generations. But in essence, you could do something that way. And basically, it's a biological marker, right? So we have to be...
So this is probably, at this point, probably about a year ago, a little over a year ago, about when I started talking to you, actually, a little bit before that. I'd started picking through some pieces and being like, this is some weird stuff. Because I had, just organically, like innately, I kind of came to this conclusion that this it sounded and felt and looked a lot like what people had written in all these stories, these old stories, which is part of where this whole CDF, this cosmic death thing came up.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, well, where would that root? And we started talking it over in group. And we started finding like all these old links to references of yeast and bread and beer and all these things all through the old ancient texts, like back to Egypt, back to, Libya. Obviously, there's a lot of it in the Abrahamic religions that gets mentioned around yeast and all those things like that. And it gets kind of codified to a point where it just looks like it's part of the story. But when you really start digging around, it's like, well, this is doing so much damage physically anyway. That when we all got this stuff out of our bodies, we immediately said, hey, it was like we knocked the dust off our antenna. Like we had a connection to whatever we didn't have a connection to before. Okay. So we're rolling along with this. It got a little weird until I saw Gary and Lou and even Tom DeLong, talking about this stuff. And they started talking about a biocontrol system, a biological control.
Yeah,
and that's where I
Lou Elizondo has his his BS in biological engineering or something. It's biology. It's something like that, like biology, right? It's
it's like immunology of some kind. And of course, Gary. I mean, Gary's like
he's like the world's
so far beyond
immunologist, right?
I mean, cancer research, forget it. You can't. It's like
everybody on the TTS board has some type of biology, all that tied to it. So if you look into those ties, I mean, I'll blast them on the screen right here. They're all tied to it.
And I know people have like talked smack about some of the things that Tom has said. But I have to say, for what my vote is worth, I am like 100% on board with the stuff that he's been talking about, him and Gary and Lou, all of them, from this biocontrol perspective. And I want to go into that for a second. So one of the things that I noticed early on was that I had a lot of cognitive issues, that I had problems, like developmentally in childhood and through high school and college and everything else. Like I couldn't some reason, and if you go and look up ApeSid, you'll see why. It's an issue that really causes a lot of these errors sometimes that end up relating to cognitive issues. I had those, and they disappeared. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna run with this and see what I can come up with. And we start looking at it more and more and more. And I happened on Gary. I think it was Gary. Yeah, it was Gary. Something you had quoted of his, that you kind of thought it was a virus. I remember you mentioned virus in one of your tweets, and I saw that tweet just off the cuff, man, like completely left field. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to hit John up.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, have you thought about fungi?
Yeah, and I
And
hadn't at that
had you?
point.
Right. See,
No, I hadn't. I thought about, that was Gene Huff had written. It was friends of Bob Lazar, and he wrote a letter to Stanton Friedman. And when Stanton Friedman died, there was a letter. It was like his handwritten letter from Gene Huff. He said, "I wanted to talk to Stanton Friedman about the alien retrovirus."
Okay.
And that's like, it was one of those things that came out when Stanton Friedman's notes from when he passed away, and it was out there, and I was like, holy shit. This was when, obviously, COVID virus was on top of everybody's mind. And, my mind went completely the other way with it. And my theory was way, whack. I don't know. It's still an interesting theory. But
Yeah.
Gene Huff wrote a letter to somebody, like a handwritten letter. And I can't remember who it is right now. I have to look into it. But basically he said, I have more information about, Lazar and the alien retrovirus. And it was like dated 1989 or whatever, 88, 89 or whatever. And like that term wasn't even used. I mean, it's still used, hyphenated retrovirus, right? Which is what fucking COVID is a retrovirus. And I was like, so my mind started going fucking crazy. And I'm like, well, if they had this, they put it in the lab, they figured it out, they weaponized it. Somehow China hacked our shit, figured out the formula, went over there, made it themselves, made an oopsie, fucked it up, spread it all over the world. And now we got to clean up it. There's theory one. Theory two is that might have happened, but at the same time, they're trying to come up with a vaccine, because if these fuckers are coming back in a big way, or they're here, and we had any interaction with them, just like War of the Worlds was, the whole War of the World story is like that we gave them a cold and it fucking killed them all. What if it's the other way around, where it's like, these fuckers are coming, we can't stop them, we can try to protect people by giving them this fucking vaccine, so that when we do interact with these assholes, humans aren't going to die.
So what the fuck? Where did you hear that?
I made that all up.
Yeah, that was good. No, like it was. It was. I was just like going, I'm trying to keep up, man. Like,
sorry, I talk fast.
Well, I mean,
it's still a theory that it's related to somehow for extraterrestrial entities, somehow that there's some type of virus that's been transferred to humans, or, we've gotten somehow from them or from the crashes or something like that. And it's infected humanity, so.
Well, I'm going to dial let's divert for just a moment, because this is a really, really good point to make here.
Yeah.
There's a spot. This is on the historical side of where we see, my group, where we've come up to these fungi being present in the human system. And it goes back to this place in Morocco called Tafarel. So a lot of times when you start talking ancient cultures and things we don't have good records for, they're not written down anywhere, obviously, because just that's not what happened in those eras, or if it did, it's lost.
Yeah.
A lot of people think, that region, Northwest Africa, they kind of focus on, especially in our circles, they focus on the Richat structure down in the Sahara, which is below the Atlas. So there's this chain of mountains a lot of people don't know about.
It could be Atlantis, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I would say look north. Honestly, if you guys are out there looking at Richat, look north to Tafarel. And the reason I say this is because everyone says, the flood or whatever came through, something changed with the water table. And that is correct. The water table did change. But interesting thing about Tafarel, actually, there's three pieces we should hit on. It was a dumping ground for humans and otherwise for about 300,000 years. Straight, concurrent, all the way up through. Okay. So 300,000 years. And think about this now. You've got a dump where you're putting things in a big pit, and it's all jungly temperature wise and stuff, real humid. And you're just throwing bodies and detritus and everything else in this pit for 300,000 years, John.
That's a long time to throw shit into a pile.
Yeah, there's some funk that's going to come out of there, probably with its own thought patterns, is what I'm getting at here. Not really, but close enough. So that's the first part of the stages here. Okay. The second part to consider is that the Atlas Mountains had a huge glacier, a set of glaciers actually, right up over them, and those let go. Eventually, those did let go. That's those guys put that in the document, which I'll get you a link for. Have that and everything else. But there's actually a change in the water table by a couple 300 feet at one point in a very short period of time, and it basically is when the Atlas Mountains, those glaciers that were up top, let go, and they came in, and that I think really contributes to what looks like it got swept out from Richat,
gotcha.
but it also on the north, because it went down towards Tafarel, that pit with the 300,000 years of detritus, bloop, right up
Popped
through.
it up.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Oh
Yummy.
yeah. And anyone that lived in that area, which is one of the earliest settlements too, by the way, I should mention that Max Planck Institute has verified that that's the earliest set of modern human genetics in Northwest Africa,
There
in
you go.
Northern Africa, 18,000 years back or so, if I remember
Right.
the numbers correctly. So that's on record with Max Planck. They know their stuff, obviously. So you've got this group of people, humans, at the least, maybe others, who knows, with the way that things are going historically now, with like other species that were out there that were human.
Right.
But they're there, and this stuff floods up through.
It's
So
basically like the sewer uploading back into you, right? Like it's
yeah,
like when the sewer backs up, because there's nowhere else for the water to go, and your shit's
yeah,
coming
and
up out of your pipes, right? Yeah.
everyone's going to catch it. You
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
everyone's going to
Yeah.
catch it. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So that's what happened. And it's to the point actually where if you go back, I think about to 15,000 years ago at the same site, so right at Taferalt,
Mhm.
they were digging through the stratification layers and they found all of a sudden, a set of skulls from the population in a certain time frame, right around the time of that flood and the let go and everything else. And 97% of them went from not having cavities in the previous layers, all of a sudden, 97% of them had eruptions in their teeth, meaning
Whoa.
eruptions like what was going on with me with the root
Wow.
canal.
Wow.
Same deal, which mine turned out to be fungal. And I'm like, click some gears, and I'm like, wait a second. So if that's the first time that showed up, and of course, we hear that, yeah, there's issues with like decay and fungi and
Right.
everything else,
Right.
but
Right.
they
Yeah.
blame it on, it's usually blamed on agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, like 7,000 years later or so, 10,000, somewhere around there. This is way, way earlier than you normally hear that. And here it is. Everybody's got cavities out of nowhere. And they're
Amazing.
looking like fungal related cavities. So I put all this together and I'm like, all right, this is a thing. And when you start tracking it across, it gets really deep into history. We start talking, like Seth, for example. Ash was, the predecessor name for Seth, and so we kind of trickled along out of that area over across towards, Libya and Egypt and all those areas. But that's one of the names that you hear a lot. It's
Right.
this Seth, this family, I guess, and we have these histories that are ingrained in all our legends and stories and everything. You want to
Right.
call it the first, the original family, whatever, the created stuff, all the creation stories and whatnot. They kind of come back to this group, where you've got, Adam, Eve, Seth, Cain, Abel that died, all this stuff. But this story keeps happening along the way. And I started looking at the Sethian stuff. Interestingly enough, it turns out that he was the guy that was the kind of the head of taking care of disease in his era. I
Gotcha.
wouldn't say he was a doctor really, but there's obviously a lot of like deep rooted stuff with Egyptian culture and the other cultures in that area, with the priests and the
He was
pharaohs
the
and everyone taking
medicine
care of
man,
medicine.
right?
Yeah, the medicine man, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty famous. There's a picture of him on the barge with his spear up. I actually have it on my header on Twitter where he's stabbing Apep through the maw, and Apep basically represented essentially death, disease, death, whatever. So that Apophis, the snake, which comes up in a lot of other cultures. I happen to go to Egypt first because it seems like it's the one that's easiest to track across from Taferelt over. And actually, that's in the genetics too, in the records. There's a link I have in one of the documents where you can see that trail starting in the Morocco area, in Taferelt area, and it just goes all along. It lands up in different areas like Mesopotamia and Egypt and everywhere else, but it goes back and it starts all at Taferel. So what we were seeing here when we started talking about it more is like, well, maybe this is a coded warning, maybe some kind of coded warning about yeast, and there's this thing that starts happening. You start seeing this mention of bread and beer over and over and over, and it's like, well, okay, what's the key component shared between the two?
Right.
Right.
Yeast. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you hear, you think about populations back then, everyone was dying at like 20, 25 years old. Well, median anyway. I know there's variances depending on who you talk to and stuff, but that's a pretty safe way to do it. And then you've got the pharaohs who were living to like 70, 80, 90 in the same era. And it's like, well, what were these guys doing that the populace wasn't? probably not jamming a bunch of bread and beer with yeast in it down their gullet. Honestly, dude. Some of it, I'm sure there was some, obviously, but there's other parts to that get kind of interesting for the phenomenon side of it. So what I see here is, there's two things going back to the whole Taffarel chain. To your point about something getting set in from an ET or NHI civilization or entity, culture, or whatever it might have been before us. I think that does kind of maybe tie into what we're looking at for these fungi that are invasive. They're tuned a certain way. They got into the populace early, way back in our earliest days of progression as civilizations. It got in there early. It became the easy thing to do. But why? Like, why is that? Why is it the easy thing to do? You know what I mean? And then everyone's getting sick from it. Obviously, if you're dying at 2025 and the only thing you have in your diet really is bread and beer, and you're kicking out at 25, well, there's probably an issue there with your food supply. Just a guess. So we started drilling down more on this, and then we started noticing these trends in the stories of people who would remove these things from their systems. And not necessarily like just fungi, but like in general disease. And, we see them in my group, we see it primarily as like a pyramid, I guess you could say, of like fungi is kind of the base layer. Everything else kind of attacks that. And that's where you get the real damage that you see for a symptom that you would go and get treated. So like Gilgamesh, Seth, a bunch of these big names from the old stories, they were essentially seeking out stuff to like clear these diseases out. And here we are in my group, thousands and thousands of years later, kind of like landing in the same bracket, roughly. I'm not saying that any of us are going to turn into Gilgamesh or anything like that, but but that goal that like one of the big goals that they had was like, how do you clear disease out of a body? It was given to certain people, priesthood, kind of like you're saying, like medicine man, priesthood, whatever it is, and they kind of carried that torch forward. And I feel like that kind of got. I don't want to say it got ingrained in the medical system, but there are changes that you can see. Like the changes from, let's say, Asclepius over to Caduceus that you see in a lot of these, signifiers that are used out there in our culture now. It's when you start looking into that, it's like, why did you go from one to the other? One's attached to like healing, one's kind of like Dionysus attached. It's all about like. Take in more and buy more, and then we'll take care of you afterward, kind of deal. This kind of how it feels to me. So when it bringing this back to the Lou, Gary, Tom stuff, I had these concerns already before I saw what they were talking about. That there's something bigger to this. Like I'm seeing this disease disappear from all these people, and things that they shouldn't have turn around. Because you're taking garden vegetables, basically, dude. It's like oregano and like black seed oil and stuff like that. You wouldn't think would do what it does, but when you dig into the active components, guess what? They're actually utilized in some pharmaceuticals. They just go through a process of extracting them and making them a little more refined. So I've kind of got this hitch, and here comes Lou and Gary, and they're talking about a biocontrol. And I start looking at, and I'd already been looking at Cryptococcus. Cryptococcus neoformans is the one that I would, kind of point people to look at if you're concerned about a biological control system. And we're going to go a little bit of a left here, so bear with me. So Cryptococcus is considered commensal to the human biome, meaning that it's in there, just going to be in there. That's part of human life. And when they say commensal, for anyone out there that doesn't know what that term's related to, it means that it exists in your body. For the most part. It's just there. You're breathing it. You and I are sitting here breathing it right now. They're just, those spores are everywhere. But with Cryptococcus and it being commensal, it means that it's in your system. It does not benefit you in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't damage you the way they put it on paper. I'll get to that in a second. But it doesn't damage the host, but it does pull nutrients from the host, like constantly. So when I talked earlier about how there's like this constant oxidative effect and other things, these things are set up to draw from you. So, they keep pulling and pulling and pulling resources without giving anything back to the system. Cryptococcus is really bad that way. So a Cryptococcus is what they call an encapsulated yeast, meaning that the biofilms we talked about earlier, that, Candida will make like a biofilm up against like epithelial membranes in your body and such. These are like a little, I don't know, it's a good term here, Death Star I guess
Just
you
come
know
right
it's
in, huh?
oh yeah, I've got some pictures on my Twitter if you go back a ways that are like these really fuzzy looking cells that are like splitting off with another little fuzzy looking really gnarly cell. That's
Yeah.
Cryptococcus neoformans, and they are nasty. So they
Mhm.
do a bunch of weird stuff in your head. Now we're
Mhm.
going to get into the biocontrol system for a second, where I see it as
Yeah.
far as it being rooted.
Yeah.
So these are in your system. They really like sitting in your central nervous system, particularly like where your hippocampus, your brainstem, all that stuff like that. Your CSF, they're all kind of hanging out in there, and they just ramp up. They'll have the colony going, and they start breeding, and there you go. You ever had a migraine?
Yeah, a couple maybe,
Yeah, I
a
don't mean to
couple
ask
in my
medical
life.
questions on air or
No, no,
anything like
no,
that,
no,
but
no, no, no. Like I've had
so
like I think I remember I had two, and it was bad. But yeah, I've heard people.
yeah,
I
okay.
know people that have them like so bad where they can't leave the house, kind of thing. But yeah, I haven't had anything like that. Right?
So anyone out there that knows migraines knows that they shouldn't be contagious.
Well, yeah.
Right. So
Mhm.
here's the thing. My wife had migraines her whole life. This is like her version of APSID. Like it hit her early. She started
Yeah.
having migraines at like
Mhm.
two
Wow.
years old. Like,
Terrible.
yeah.
Terrible.
Oh, bad, bad. So she dealt with that her whole life. She no longer has migraines
It's good.
at
It's
all
amazing. It's
after
amazing.
this whole, chasing all this stuff out. But she had taken me to a lake that she got exposed to when she was very young, like
Hmm.
4, 5, 6 months old. She, the old take the 4-month-old out in the lake and dip them real quick, take them back out, give them back to grandma or whatever. She got exposed to fungi
Wow.
in this lake.
Wow.
And that's what kind of set up this series of failures for her. She had a couple other symptoms I didn't have with like her eye had turned in at one point
Oof.
on her right, and there's other people actually I've seen in out in the public sphere that have exposed themselves to Cryptococcus neoformans like 100%, and they had the same problem pop up. I'm not going to say who it is because I've actually hit him up personally on Twitter and be like, "Yo, dude, you should probably go get checked for that and probably get rid of this other thing you're hanging on to." But
Wow.
I'll leave his name out of it just because I don't want to get sued. But yeah, so it does happen, and it happened to her at one.
Wow.
So that's so she carried that all the way through. Now she and I went to visit her mom, and I went to the same lake. Now I had not been in the water for. I'm not a swimmer, so I hadn't
Mhm.
been in the water for like 5, 10 years at this point. I usually just go for a quick dip and clear out. But she's
Mhm.
like, "Hey, this is where I grew up. This is where I swam," and she didn't tell me this is like one of those small lakes where everybody's cabin kind of dumps into the water.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. They call
Nice.
it duck fever is what they'll usually put a
Uh,
warning sign up for, but that's not what it is, bro.
uh,
So I go and I go for a quick dip. It's literally like I got out of the car. It was the first thaw. I got out of the car, got in the water, got out, dried out, got right back in the car, and went home. Back to her mom's house, and I got so sick, dude. Like
wow.
by the time that I got back to her mom's house, and this is again for me, it's because I have all these predispositions. So get back to her mom's house, and I'm sick as a dog. And over the next 10, 15 days, it progresses. I get worse, go to the doctor, put me on a bunch of antibiotics, which is not a
Hmm.
good idea if you're trying to fight fungi, just an aside.
Hmm.
So this stuff gets kind of locked in, really,
Hmm.
is what
Hmm.
happens. And it's just having a party. So all of a
Wow.
sudden, and bear in mind, up to this point, I had never had a migraine in my life, John.
Boom.
All of
Got
a
one.
sudden, about 6 months later, I start having crippling migraines, like fucking gone. Like can't
Wow.
see, like star vision, the weird auras and stuff. So I
Uh,
literally went to this lake that she got them from as a child,
wow.
like 1 years old, and then I all of a sudden at 35 at this point, all of a sudden I had migraines. Couldn't get rid of them. I'd have them like once or twice a week
They drained that lake.
sometimes. Oh yeah. Well, it's funny that lake, which again I don't want to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
any trouble here, but it's a lake that's local to us, she and I, and it's kind of like a state or two over, and it has upstream from it. It has a pretty good local like Native American legend, indigenous American
Mm.
legend that it's cursed.
Oh, there you
That the
go.
back that the back of the mountain where that drains down towards this lake, that's a man-made lake, by the way.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, of course, I know it was going to be a problem there, but that was known as like a cursed area
Oh, there you go.
by them. Yeah, and when the when the state tried to give them back the land, apparently they were like, "Nope, you can. That's no, you can keep that.
Nope.
It's yours." Yep,
Thanks.
that was the rumor anyway that I heard for quite a
Yeah.
while from her mom that lives down there. So
That's
so all
awesome.
that said, you can see where these things are heading, and I'm like, all right, so after getting better, I start looking into cryptococcus. Cryptococcosis was my official diagnosis, technically, and I start noticing this similarity to what Gary's talking about with the lysing, like the burn damage looking in the the hippocampus area that he always refers to as part of his research. And I was already looking at a part of what he was studying just on my own in the dentate gyrus, which is like where you generate a lot of neural stem cells. So your brain should be able to repair itself. But again, it's inflamed all the time. It's inflamed a lot of the time, especially for people like me. I should like clarify a little bit. That's for people, I'm like the far end of the spectrum, so you'd definitely be able to see it in my set. But that inflammation causes problems with you being able to generate those neural stem cells, like I've shown you in some of the articles. And then they don't go where they should. They don't get generated. They don't differentiate properly. Right now, the way that it looks after getting all this stuff out of our systems and our brain, that's turned around, and we're getting like a pretty high throughput on paper anyway. We've got a couple things we're doing right now for like testing, which is still really early in the works. My boss is kind of putting that all together because he's the grant guy. It's not me. So that's all getting ironed out. But when you go and look at this, you can find some data. This is where the biological control thing would come in from my perspective. The cryptococcus is already in your brain. It's in your astrocytes. So it will cause an activated state, is what they call it, where your astrocytes, it can like break the blood-brain barrier, essentially, because astrocytes, you've got like capillary astrocytes in the brain that kind of have finger kind of things that go around the capillary to get that blood-brain barrier maintained. Cryptococcus can Trojan horse. It can either push itself through, get absorbed by endocytosis. There's a bunch of different processes that can get into your astrocytes and just parks it there. And it'll start breeding. It'll replicate in there. So then you're gonna get a bunch of problems with your astrocytes. It'll snare up your microglia. So your microglia are kind of, for a quick way to think about it, they're like the white blood cell, like the cleanup boys of your brain.
Okay.
And they're supposed to go in and kind of like they do a lot of work, but basically for simplification, they kind of cut things up that are bad, shuttle them out, and all that stuff like that. A lot of MAO. So monoamine oxidase issues come from microglia and activated states in these glial cells. We found some stuff with Schwann cells that relates back to this, another issue. So demyelination issues that you and I have talked about, it's also showing up related to this. So your body can't quite repair itself. Where it gets really funky is when you look at these yeast related to ionizing radiation.
Ooh.
We're gonna have some fun now.
Oh yeah.
So cryptococcus is already in there, right? It's already all through you. It's in your central nervous system. It does things like pull plasma from your to basically like keep itself fed and happy. That's where the meningital headaches come from, somewhat with cryptococcosis. It'll kind of flood the system with too much of that fluid, and it kind of gives you like a pressure charge. Totally.
Yeah.
So when you hit these things with ionizing radiation, and a lot of this research has been done on Saccharomyces, but these are all, when you look at the family tree for these invasive fungi, like you get albicans, Candida albicans up here, and then like a couple branches over is Saccharomyces. And when you look at Cryptococcus neoformans, sitting fairly close to that is Torula yeast that you see in food all the time. Yeah. So let that roll through your head for a second. But that's a whole different bucket we can talk about sometime. But with the ionizing radiation, the ones that are already in your system, it's been proven in the data that there's they can live off radiation basically in the absence of other food sources. These fungi
they feed off of it, huh?
Radiotrophic. Yep. So and you'll see that when you go and look up things like NASA's experiments that they're thinking about, like shielding radiation with, or some of the stuff going on around Chernobyl, for example. Cryptococcus neoformans is a big study over at Chernobyl because there's an open source of radiation, and they've kind of gone through the roof as far as like being, I guess you call them superpowered. It's like hulking out kind of. Virulence is the correct term for it, but that's what it would be, increasing inside the body. It increases virulence a bit. Significantly if you get enough ionizing radiation. That's where this whole thing ties together. So you've got your baseline ambient. And they did this experiment. These guys were like, okay, can these things survive just off radiation in the absence of other food sources? So they essentially did like a Faraday type setup. They took some of these cells and they put them in a spot where they got like 0.01 on the dial, the millisieverts, as far as exposure. And then
Right.
they got ambient, like what you would consider ambient to just being on the Earth existing. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
And then they had an elevated that was 6 times ambient.
Mhm.
Okay. So as far as millisieverts exposure, and the ones that were in the kind of Faraday setup
Mhm.
died.
Hmm.
So they couldn't survive. They
Wow.
didn't have a regular food source. They didn't have the radiation side of the resources to pull from, so they died
Gotcha.
off. The
Wow.
ones at the ambient, they stayed kind of standardish, kind of normal. Really didn't really. They kind of were able to survive off the radiation and kept themselves going just barely enough, just functioning.
Mhm.
And then you get to the 6 times ambient,
Mhm.
and the virulence, like I was mentioning a moment ago, just went through the roof.
Hmm.
Oh, skyrocketed.
Wow.
So that's okay in a test tube.
Mhm.
That's okay on a petri dish, I should say. But it's like, now put that inside your head.
Right. Well, didn't that pretty
So
much happen to the people that were in Chernobyl or that region, or people that were exposed to all that? I mean, that had to have
yeah,
been like a legit case that they didn't want to be a part of. But that, I mean,
I mean
that had to have
that would
happened,
be my
right?
suspicion immediately. Yeah, sure. I mean, I have a big poke that we could go over if you really want to go there. But if you're into it, I'm into it. I mean, it's you know where I'm heading, I think.
Yeah.
So we've got directed energy concerns with certain stuff out there in the wild.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm gonna hit this real quick if
Yeah.
if
Do
you're up
it.
for
Yeah.
it.
Go for it. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
So this came across from one of the guys I research with, and he said,
Mhm.
"Hey, a lot of this lysing damage that you and I are seeing in these advanced cryptococcosis cases, where you look at people have had long-term competency issues. Um, it looks like what Gary's talking about with Havana, and what they're
Mhm.
talking about in general with Havana syndrome." And they kind of wrote it off. They said, "Oh, it's not." They've
Mhm.
kind of gone back and forth. I haven't really kept up on the research recently, but yeah, I
Right.
remember them kind of writing it off.
Well,
It's
they got
not
they got like all up, they got all up in arms about it, and then they got
Yeah,
real quiet about it again. Yeah. Right.
right,
Or
right,
it's not a nation state or something. Yeah. I
yeah.
don't know what it is. Yeah.
So here's my deal, and this is where it comes to a larger control system that might not be uh, of human hands. Let's put it
Mhm.
that way. Okay,
Mhm.
so when you look at Havana, if you've already got these in your head, which you do,
You
it's
do. Everybody
commensal.
does,
Yep,
right?
they're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So you could potentially, theoretically, you could point that energy. So it's like a two-piece thing. This
Mhm.
thing that they're looking for, in my opinion, anyway, with Havana,
Mhm.
and it's in other things out there. You look at somebody who's had a bunch of radiation, for
Mhm.
example, and they get chemo brain. Is
Okay.
it what it's
Yep.
called? I
There's
don't like the
another thing.
term. There's a
Right.
better term for this, better
Right.
terms for it, but I'm not clinically trained, so bear with me on that.
Mhm.
But the chemo brain thing that you
Mhm.
hear a lot of times, or if you see it with like an advanced HIV case, they have the same kind of setup.
Mhm.
That's really, really similar to Havana. But there's other things that have entered the mix. So you've
Mhm.
got the radiation; it takes care of what it's trying to take care of. But then there's something left behind, and
Mhm.
that something is now more virulent. Hopefully, you got
Mhm.
enough of it, that it's not going to recur at a
Mhm.
point that it would take you quickly. But that's still there. The virulence is increased at that point. That switch is flipped.
Right.
With these yeast, once that switch is flipped, that switch is flipped.
Wow.
So if you take something that's intentionally directed at, say, someone's head from
Mhm.
whatever distance it might be that you could direct that type of energy, you're going to put the virulence through the roof
Right.
again.
Yeah.
And like I say, this doesn't have to necessarily be like Havana syndrome is
A vector. It could
a
be
combat
anything.
issue, right? It's not like a
Yeah. Yeah.
combat thing necessarily,
Right.
but you could have something like, I know Tom has mentioned, off the coast of Alaska,
Mhm.
there's a huge pyramid shape
Right.
of some kind off Valdez.
Mhm.
That I believe there's a quote from him not too long ago that
So it's
said
it's
it's active,
underground. It's
right?
actively suppressing consciousness.
Right, it's activated, right? It's
Mhm.
activated.
There's a pyramid and it's underground, and they've been studying it for decades.
What?
Yeah, it's bigger
Where?
than Giza. It's it's not that far from Valdez, I believe. I would have to check on where it's at, but apparently, yeah. And I know a very important person that from the Pentagon that met with one of the lead defense contractors that were studying it, and they told him, they said, "We think we finally know what it's doing. It's all turned on." We think it's suppressing consciousness. That's what he said.
What the hell?
Fucking wild. I know, wild,
Dude,
right?
did they discover this? Well, of course they did, probably after that giant earthquake that basically like Valdez had to like shift back like 2 miles. Like they had to rebuild.
You know what? I
the
don't
city.
know. There was the legend is that there was an earthquake of sorts, and all the seismographs picked up the waves that come, you know, all the way through everything, and they saw this whole anomaly, like as those shock waves went through the land, there was some kind of structure or something that perturbed, you know, on the receiving end of these waves and so they dug some tunnels, elevator shafts, made a little strip there to land, and they've been underground studying it forever. That's how the legend is. Then the news did a little piece on it, and then all of a sudden all that shit disappeared. The people at the station said the guys came in and said never air this again, kind of thing. So but on the deathbed of a couple people that were out there, they said like they were very aware of that. I think in the beginning, if I remember correctly, again, it was like someone that worked for like Bell Labs or like, who was it? It was maybe it was more the precursor to AT&T or something like that. Like, I can't remember all the, I don't want to get it all too fucked up. People kind of hang on my words when I talk about shit like this. But, so the only thing I want to say is, yes, there is a pyramid and we've been studying it, and I pretty much have said all I know about it. But I got some other theories, but I don't have any.
So, and that to me, look at what's going on around us now. I'm not saying this is all part of that, but it very well could be. It very well could be, and when you, like I say, out there in the wild, take a look at those lysing issues that are in the cases I've identified that are 100% fungal, 100% cryptococcus related, and then go and look at what's happening with Havana, and you'll see they're so close that it gets uncomfortable really quickly. Yeah, you and I had talked about that for days on end, where it's like I think this is what's happening, man. I really do. I think this is the thing that they're talking about. I don't know if they're looking at it this way. I don't want to say that I'm stumbling on something that no one else has thought of, but it seems like there's a gap there that should at least be looked at a little deeper by people. My group is, of course, and I've run it by all of our circle, and we're all on the same page. But again, it's hard to get the momentum sometimes in academia and get that out there if it's something that's going to hit up against the standard, the accepted versions of what's happening out there in microbiology, immunology, and whatnot. But I do think that this is an aspect of it. I really do. So that's kind of a general idea of where I've gotten to. Yeah. With all this stuff, the fungal research and the invasive disease aspect of it. If you want to take a second, I did want to talk about psi a little bit. Yeah. Sure. Because we've had some weird stuff happen there, and I feel like it's connected to getting these fungi removed from the system.
Clearing the antenna, right?
Yeah, knocking the dust off. Exactly. One thing that's an important note is microtubules in the brain, in the body in general. Okay, so we have our own that we make, tubulin, microtubules, and so on. Fungi have their own. Particularly as invasive fungi, they have their own. They have their own structures. Oh yeah. Well, one of the jokes that you'll hear out there when you get into researching invasive fungal disease is they call them an amoeba in a tube. Yeah, totally. Right. So they're building these hyphal structures. Now, one thing I didn't touch on yet is the way that they're kind of opposite normal mycology rules. So when you are out there studying yeast that's not like an invasive yeast, like an infectious yeast, you'll hear mold in the cold, yeast in the heat. Okay. That's just a little rhyme thing that people do just to keep tabs on it. These human pathogenic fungi are completely the opposite. Meaning that when they're at the lower temperature ranges, like when they first enter your system and they're setting up in the epithelial, like in your sinuses or your oral cavity, whatever. Part, right? Yeah. So it's already kind of it's at a temperature range where it's not going to flip the switch. Gotcha. Because you're 98 some on average, but these other areas of your body aren't going to be that temperature all the time. So as soon as they hit, this is where it gets weird. As soon as they hit 95 Fahrenheit, they flip the switch, and they go from being the yeast form, which, it'd be a mother cell and buds a little daughter, and the daughter pops off, becomes a mother cell, and so on. They go into a hyphenation mode where they essentially build these hyphal structures. Some of them, like Candida in particular, is really good at moving from endocytosis to active penetration, which is unheard of. That is unheard of in most pathogenic issues. You don't see something going from endocytosis to active penetration like that. It's like bridging this weird line between being like a bacteria would, endocytosis, to being actively
virus,
doing
almost?
something. Well,
Not
closer to being
really.
like a helminth, like a tapeworm, something
Wow.
like a parasite.
Jesus.
So it's like
Whoa.
true parasitism versus just an infection
Wow.
in my mind. And that's out there in the data. You can find images of it literally. There's a bunch of studies now because they found this chemical called Candida lysine, which is a real piece of crap. But
Wow.
right, so all these things kind of tie together to, in the brain, you have essentially these things that are in there doing their work. Like Cryptococcus neoformans has the highest negative charge of any pathogen. So think about that in your brain. You've got your own EMF. You're trying to keep coherent for all the things you need to do consciously and otherwise. And this is just in there, like zapping, like just
Wow. Just
doing
creating a
things, like
negative field
discharging.
in your head.
Yeah, exactly. And they're breeding colonies. Cryptococcus breeding colonies is where you get into the real mess for something that would have a network structure like Candida albicans does, because Candida builds. And everybody, go look this up on YouTube. Fungal Highway. Go check out YouTube Fungal Highway. There's a few videos around that will give you an idea of what these are doing inside your body. So, and literally it looks like it's just these tubes with,
Branches
nuclei,
going out.
mitochondria,
Yeah.
and then there's just inside the tube is just things free flowing. It looks like a separate blood system almost, so a separate
Wow.
circulatory system. It's that bonkers. So that's going on in your head. So the idea is that you've got your microtubulin, and that's all your neurons and everything else, just to boil it down quick. You've got yours. And now these are in there too. So if you know much about electrics, you don't want to lay a bare wire from like circuit to circuit, dude. What's going to happen? It's going to go haywire, right?
Yeah.
So, I see that as an aspect of kind of the control itself.
Yeah.
And when you knock that out of there, now you're talking about having your own resources back, like you said way earlier, with like repairing DNA and so on. It's repairing lots of other stuff when your body has a chance to breathe and do what it should be able to do biologically without the majority of the pathogenic interference. Boom.
Fighting. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like always fighting, right? Always under
Yeah.
stress, always under strife. You hear this kind of thing and you're like, oh, that sounds like a lot of what they talk about issues with humanity. Right?
Maybe.
You know what I mean? Just,
yeah.
we take it that far if you want to. But when you take these things out, some weird stuff starts happening. The MO, or the old rule, I should say, where like you get older, you kind of dream less and less over time. For most folks, that's what you hear for a lot of people. You hear like, oh, I don't dream anymore. All this kind of like tapers off. And a lot of that is, in my opinion, related to endogenous, meaning self-generated dimethyltryptamine.
All right.
Okay. So, because when you dream, that's when you release a fair amount of it. So, you're either delinking or linking whatever it would be from here to there. Just kind of got a little bit of a grease effect on your neural functioning, your cortical functioning for sure, which we'll go into in just a second for a little more detail. But when you pull that out, now all of a sudden you got your stuff back, and you're able to kind of like get your chemistry where it needs to be. And dreaming, which is the first thing we hitched onto with this, everybody started reporting that they were dreaming again. Out of nowhere. They're like, hey, I did this. I read up on what you guys said. It fit a bunch of stuff I've been having problems with. I tried it for a month, and now, boom, all this stuff disappeared for me for health issues, and now I'm dreaming again. Like I haven't dreamed in 10, 15, 20 years.
Amazing.
So we're like, oh, that's weird. That's real weird. So we started focusing on that a little bit and drilling down. At the same time, one of the researchers that I work with, his wife developed he said MS at first, but it's a little different than that. Something that was related to some COVID she got and a co-infection with aspergillus and all this other stuff. So we started chasing that on demyelination and trying to reset demyelination issues, which we were somewhat successful on. I'm not going to go too detailed on that right now, but we were pretty successful there. You know, because she, again, you know, she read over what he put in front of her, and she's like, "Oh, that does sound like it." So, you know, whatever his garden vegetables do, let's try it.
Right.
So you know, and that got us thinking more. Okay, so if we're stopping demyelination, what else are we repairing here? And we started looking into this whole idea of the antenna being more under our control, where it's not getting the interference, and that led to people being able to dream more and so forth, right? So we started looking into where the chemistries are getting affected. And we started figuring out that, well, wait a second, it looks like a lot of these pieces add up to an increase in endogenous dimethyltryptamine production in the human body. And not just in the brain, but like lots of spots around the body have there's this other chemical that's tied in, INMT, which, you know, there's INMT and Adamet and these chemistries that kind of like end up doing methylation processes to get over to that dimethyltryptamine. It's actually methylated twice is how that works out for the endogenous version. So we're looking at this as like maybe flipping the switch back on.
Wow.
Like, is this chemistry that we should have had access to the whole time? So where it gets weird is that I started having, and a lot of us did, but I'll go on my own here for a second. We started having a lot of these really strange dreams. And one of the first ones that I had was I dreamed that there was me and this other me in this dream. And we were in kind of a nondescript area, and it wasn't, you know, wasn't really anything noteworthy on the setting. But I had this issue on the back of my neck that the doctor had noted, because I've had issues with lymphoma. I'm a double cancer survivor, by the way, too, on top of all this stuff.
Geez, bro.
Right, but that was yeah. So I got the deuce, right? Totally. So so you know, obviously I'm still here. So win. But the thing about this with that is that I kind of felt like there was something to do with the way that was affecting my system, and you know, it's kind of been in the back of my mind, so that's why I think this might have happened in this dream. But this other me in the dream comes up. And it's really weird. It's kind of like if you could imagine yourself, but like Beetlejuiced. You know, I'm sure most people remember that movie. But it's like if you ran into a Beetlejuice version of you, that's what this was like.
Weird.
And it kept like getting up in my shit in the dream and being like, if you keep messing with that, it's going to kill you. And talking about this thing on the back of my neck, the doctors were concerned with, which is a lymphoma out branch, basically, is what it ended up being. And it kept getting in my face, and I couldn't think of anything to do besides in the dream. I'm just like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care if it's going to kill me. I'm going to keep fighting this because I feel like it's taken me away from me or whatever. All this healing happened. Obviously, you know, I'm looking over, and I in the dream just kind of gut this thing, like nuts to neck. I'm like, all right, and then that just poof, gone. It kind of like turned into dust in the dream and disappeared, and I woke up. So like, oh, that was a really weird dream to have. And I talked to my wife about it, and she's like, oh, that's really weird because last night I had a dream similar to that, but it was me, and I was an old hag, like you see, like the one from Sleep Paralysis kind of deal, how she described it. It's like, but that was me. I was me, but that was also me, and I was like hanging out. She explained this whole thing, and in her dream, it kind of like the same thing happened, but it like did other stuff, different interactions, and I was like, that's weird. Checked with my buddy that we researched with, and like 2 or 3 days before that, he had a very similar dream. And then we started noticing in the forums and so forth in the groups that other people started reporting that.
Weird.
Like, hey, I had this weird, like slimy, shitty version of me show up in this dream, and I got into a confrontation with it, and then I woke up. I'm like,
that's bizarre.
Hell?
It a psi ability thing, or
it is a psi ability thing, or
like
something.
Collective consciousness, you know, like
Well, it gets okay. So here's an interesting side note on my front. I was, you know, as far as those tests and stuff for personality type, I was always INTP. INTP. So like the thinker wizard type, whatever they call it. The one who's like introverted, kind of sticks to just, you know, reading, sticks to himself, whatever. after that happened, that dream that I had, I cleared this thing out, cleared it out, whatever you want to call it. I took another personality, the same personality test I've been taking, and just
Yeah.
answered it, the way I would normally answer things.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I'm an ENFJA. Yeah. Well, which switches you from the introverted type
To the
to the
extrovert.
hero. That's the
Oh,
hero
wow,
type. And I'm
wow.
like, why would you have? And anyone out there that knows those type of personality tests, there's no reason that you should go from INTP all the way to
Yeah.
ENFJA. It just doesn't. I think that's the right
Wow.
one anyway. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that's the
Wow.
one I landed in for a bucket. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird too. I mentioned that to a few people that are on the psychology side of the people I work with, and they're like, yeah, that's not supposed to happen, but hey, good for you if that's what you wanted. So we keep going with this.
Mhm.
We're still kind of drilling down and figuring out ways to keep the fungi out of the mix, and
Right.
then give our body enough of the base chemistry to point towards endogenous dimethyltryptamine. And I start having more and more, and all of us, we've just had this chain of like extremely weird dreams. You can go and check the forum posts that are out there,
Yeah.
and they're reported over and over and over. The people I deal with personally, there's about 5 or 6 of us that are core that we've actually landed in the same spot.
Whoa.
I don't know what to say about that one. Maybe
Right.
somebody out there has a little input, but we've literally landed in a setting
Mhm.
that we've termed the lodge, just
Hmm.
colloquially, and I
Yeah.
got there first.
Yeah.
And it was just a weird thing. I was like literally hanging out with this famous person I'm not going to name, and they're in this dream, and I'm like explaining to them that their setup for life is in the wrong direction.
Hmm.
I don't know why I'm having this conversation with this person. I woke up and I was, that's the weirdest shit. And
Beyonce?
then what's that now?
Was it Beyonce?
No. It was
I'm just trying to guess.
yeah, no, it was it was a much larger scale person, believe it or not. That I was like, why am I talking to this person about how their life is going the wrong direction right now? So
It's just
I didn't think much of it, and that's how I usually write these
Kanye.
off. Yeah,
Just make-
So I write these things off. You know what I mean? I have this propensity that when something weird happens, I
Yeah.
write it off initially, right
Well,
off the
yeah.
bat. I'm like,
Well, most
that's
people do. They're
hokey.
just like, yeah, or just
It's
out.
hokey.
Yeah.
It's hokey.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
weird shit. It's just a dream,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So I keep having this series of dreams at this lodge place, and I could draw you a floor plan, dude. I've been there so many
Wow.
times now, like 8 or 9 times now. My wife has been there two or 3 times. My friend that researches closest with me has been there 3 or 4 times himself. So
Wow.
this is like some weird continuity. I don't understand. That's like something's happening there, of course, because I haven't told them certain things they'll tell me, and when they say it, I'm like, that's the place.
Yeah.
That is it. That's exactly what. Yeah, that would be the floor plan that goes from here to here. Yep, you're at it. So we've been talking these things over, and that's weird enough on the sci end, right?
Mhm.
So I'm kind of reaching at this point because
Mhm.
I've had another series of dreams going alongside it that are related to a timeline that's not
Oh.
mine.
Oh.
Where I am literally like seeing things all the way back to like historical event stuff
Mhm.
that isn't in the books, but
Hmm.
matches the right setting and the right time frame and what it should have looked, I would think, if it were brand new and whatnot. And I had all these things going on for a while, because we're
Mhm.
talking a year and a half, 2 years at this point. So about 6, 7 months into it, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna test this again,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna say, hey, whatever's involved or
Yeah.
got a
Yeah.
hand in this, whatever's going on here, I need some proof that I'm not just going bonkers and just having
Mhm.
these weird dreams that are not making any sense. There's no way to analyze them. I've run it by people that analyze dreams, and they're like,
Yeah.
I got nothing, dude.
Yeah. Right.
So
Right.
so that night, and I'll explain something that's on each side of this that set me off on asking for like, hey, give me a sign that this is actually something. So I go to sleep normal. And this dream I have, I wake up in my bed in the dream. I get up, I put my shit on, I go downstairs, I go outside, and I go to the mailbox. Now, in the dream, real setting out here, it was wintertime. In the dream,
Mhm.
it was nice summertime, grass is green, dirt, no snow everywhere, and all that stuff. So I'm
Mhm.
walking out, and I'm like noticing things in the dream, like the gravel crunching under my feet, the dust in
Mhm.
my nose, like it's really, really there. And I get, it's all first person too, which I didn't
Mhm.
used to dream in first person for me. I do all the
Mhm.
time now. I don't have anything
Mhm.
that's not a first person dream. Um, so in this dream, I get up to my mailbox, and we had been waiting for a couple checks to come in that we were owed,
Mhm.
and I had no idea when these were going to show up. or anything like that in real life. And in the dream, when we've had the same post carrier the whole 10 years we've lived here, they always put our mail flat, all the way in the back of the box on the left. Always, because the mailbox is shitty. It gets wet if they don't, everything else. And in the dream, I open the mailbox and I look on the right-hand side of the mailbox at the front, and upright are the 2 checks that we've been waiting for. I pull them out of the box. I'm like, oh, that's cool. These are here. You know, I'm like, whatever. And I look at them in the dream, white envelopes, clear cellophane with brown paper for the check inside it. All right. So then in the dream, I walk back up to the house, get to the door, put my hand on the door, turn the knob. I wake up. And my wife and I, we had gotten in this habit because of everything that's been going on around this.
Just writing it down.
Checking in. Yep. Checking in with each other. Hey, what'd you dream about last night? Anything weird?
Right.
And she told me this whole thing that was going on in hers. And she's like, so what did you dream about? And I'm like, I don't really remember. And then I laughed to myself. I'm like, no.
Checking the mail. I was just checking the mail.
It was the stupidest shit. I like literally got up here in this house, that went out to that mailbox, got the checks. They were there. Now, I told her this at like 8 a.m. Okay.
Yeah.
So 8 a.m, and then 3:30 in the afternoon, the mail truck comes. And I'm like, oh, I'll go out and check the mail. And I get all suited up. I head out there, snow, everything else. I get about halfway up the driveway, and like the closest thing I can explain is like spider sense tingling. And I'm like, something weird's happening here. I got to the mailbox, and for the first time in 10 years, I open it, and our mail is at the front of the box, on the right, standing up, and I pull it out, and I'm like, no shit. Fucking white envelopes, cellophane, brown paper. I had no idea what these checks were going to look like. And so I had a witness to this. I had told my wife like 7 hours beforehand when we woke up, this is the dream I had. And I went out to the box, like not even 7 hours later, there it is. So I was like, wow. So you can literally ask for proof, and something's going to be like, hey, I'll show you proof, dude. It's like the stupidest thing to show you. It's like, I'm not looking for like,
the lotto numbers.
Stuff.
Why can't I get the fucking lotto?
yeah, exactly. But here's the clincher. That lodge place, I had a really weird feeling about it. I ran it by someone else who was very into psi and really keeping up on that way more than I do. And they were like, look, I've got a bad feeling about the place. It sounds like a trap. Make sure you're keeping your head clear when you're in there. Make sure you're protecting yourself, all that stuff like that they would tell you. And I had kind of disregarded it. And the night before the check dream, I had this dream that I had set myself into. I've gotten into this habit. Actually, a bunch of us have gotten into this habit of a very interesting way, I think, to get into OBEs or lucid dreaming, where we all kind of talked amongst ourselves and realized that we all had a staticky looking effect when we're getting ready to go to sleep. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. There's like visual snow is what you'll hear it called sometimes. But when you you have your eyes closed and you're in the dark, you still have kind of like a little bit of a pattern going on. So I've been able to like maneuver that stuff since I was a kid. Like when I was really little, I figured out, hey, you know what? This is like Tetris-y kind of stuff. I can like move the static around and get it out of the way, and like it changes colors. I can move it around, whatever. And I didn't think much of it until this. This whole chain of events around this healing process that we're going through. And I started focusing on it while I was getting ready to go to sleep because I was having these dreams and whatnot. I'm like, I might as well try and like leverage this a little bit. And I started moving the static further and further. And eventually it became a gap where there was no static. It just became like a round, like right dead center, like a round spot I could kind of step through. So I got into this habit of doing that, and I was able to get back to this lodge pretty frequently. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to focus on this really hard tonight, and I'm going to try and contact, if there is something, I'm going to try and contact whatever set this crap against humanity, if that's the case, if it is what I suspect is going on. So I wake up, I get through my process while I'm going to sleep, and when I blip out, I blip into this lodge setting again. And at this point, I'm in this room that is, like 15 feet wide and about 80 feet long. And it's all windows and chairs, like a giant, huge table, chairs and everything else. And there was nothing in the room but me, right? And it's the same woodwork and everything as the other visits I've had there. And I look to my left, And there's this figure, dude, in this dream that, I'm standing up and the table is like, to my ribs. The top of the table is like at the side of my ribs is how big this table is. And the chairs are to match, huge. And I look over and this thing's sitting in one of the chairs and it's so big that its knees were hitting the bottom of the table and it was like towering over me sitting down. And when I got to look at it, the first impression I had was it's like mechanical or something. Right. So it had like these big white looking discs for eyes with black spots in the middle. Kind of, I took it as like a very like a beak looking appendage, and then like Mesopotamian statue looking hair. And it's just sitting there with his hands on the table. And I was like, instantly in the dream, I'm like, oh, fuck this. I can't even deal with whatever this is. I'm out. Like, I'm talking to you about it now, and I'm still like, ugh, shouldn't be talking about this. So, that was weird enough. All I said was I wanted to meet the thing that set this against mankind. And it's this thing that looks like, I don't know, a Mothman, Osiris, whatever, I don't know, something in that mix of like this weird, image that we've carried forward as mankind, collectively in our subconscious somewhere. It was in there. And I just blipped out. I woke myself right up, forced myself right out of that dream. So that was this first night. The second night in a row was the envelope dream when I said, hey, if this is legit, I need proof of some kind that I'm actually doing something here. So that was right after, because I got so freaked out by this. I was like, I've got to write that off as just complete horse shit, because that unsettling. So the third night after the envelope dream, I got a hair across my ass on the third night out of these three. I was like, I'm going to go back and try and meet up with that again. So I did the same process I had done that first night. And I get in that same room, dude. I drop right into it. Right. I get my spot open. I push through OBE, lucid dream, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what you would call this process, honestly. I mean, I guess it's lucid dreaming of some kind. But there's, like I said, there's 5 or 6 of us personally that I know that are doing it now. So this third night, I go back to the same room. I get into the room. I'm in the same corner, into the same door that I was before, looking in the same direction. And I knew immediately this shit's going to be on my left. This thing I dealt with last time is going to be on my left. I look over and I get a better look at it. And it pretty much does look like what you would think, like Mothman's described as, Osiris, whatever, this like hawk looking face, weird long hair, big black cloak, all this stuff. And I just formed the thought in my head instead of because I said I wanted to meet this thing that had set this against us. And the thought in my head was, I just formed this question, why? Like, why would you do this? And as soon as I got that thought formed, this shit, it felt like I got dropped under about 100 feet of water with no scuba gear. As soon as I asked that question, it was like something, just all the pressure in the world, and like the dream blipped me out instead of where I got spooked the first time and blipped out. I was ready to, have a conversation with this thing, whatever, in this dreamland that I'm in. And I was like, well, I'm just not going to mess with it again.
Yeah, right.
Not going to mess with that again. I don't know, dude. This size stuff, where I get to with it is that we've removed so much pathogenic interference in the brain and upped what we can for endogenous DMT production, that there's this, let me pull these links up real quick. I want to go over this for a moment. All right, here we go. So an interesting thing happens with dimethyltryptamine. It alters your cortical processing, like your cortical waves. So you're standing and traveling waves. So think about, and they just put this article up a little bit ago, where there's these whirls, like spirals,
in your
eddies,
brain,
in the like out in your cortical part of the processing that they can measure. And it's kind of like if you think about rivers going from being the river into the ocean, is a quick way to boil this down. That energy is getting transferred, and there's a bunch of pieces and parts that kind of go together. It's a lot more complicated than that. There's guys out there that know way more than I do. I can look at the basics. But if you think about friction on stuff like that out in liquid dynamics, like fluid dynamics, if you can get something to make that easier, the energy transfer is easier. That's essentially what happens. So we've got cryptococcus causing a bunch of static. And then you've got these other things that are, like you're lacking your dimethyltryptamine that should be there, that makes this process easier, because it kind of speeds them up, is basically the best way to think about it. It makes it like there's more like the viscosity has changed, so it's easier. There's less energy getting spent maintaining just the coherence, I guess is a good way to think about it.
Mhm.
So when you take all that static out and then you give that dimethyl push from your natural stores that you're producing, it's all smooth now. So that energy, and like most energy would go further
Yeah.
out instead of being,
Mhm.
subjected to just being around. There's actually, what if I should shoot
That's
this over to you?
yeah.
Okay, so they've measured the brain at a distance now,
Mhm.
like our own electromagnetic field,
Right. Right.
in a standard setting without anyone doing what I've done to myself with all this hacking.
Mhm.
It can be measured at 63 centimeters away.
Okay.
So, a little over 2 feet. Um, our theory right now is that there's something happening there that is extending that
Mm.
further than that 63 centimeters would be,
Gotcha.
right?
Gotcha.
Because like I say, if you're looking at a standard model, which is
Right.
where this test was run, now you're pushing things in the other direction instead of maintaining all that friction, keeping things running that way, so to speak. Now you're pushing outward more,
So
and
that
so
could
that's
be like when you're under meditation or CE5 or whatever you're doing there, whatever those protocol, you could be doing that. You could be extending your
well, that's a great point, right?
in a way, by whatever the vibration, or frequency or whatever you want to call it, that could be happening too. And then, just by, cleaning yourself out, you maybe it's like that all the time. You're walking around
Yeah.
meditating, doing CE5 all the time, right? Or
Yeah,
whatever,
basically
right?
that's it. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think you're really onto something with that. Like, people that are really already kind of used to that process
right.
and that know how to go to RV states, remote viewing
Yeah,
states, those
yeah.
those type of things.
Because I've done
Um,
that stuff, man. I've done remotely, and I've done, I've called in orbs, and I've seen that shit. Like I know how to get there. And it takes a little bit, but once it's just like riding a bike. Once you get there, you can do it easier. But
right.
I imagine if you clean out all the hindrances and you increase the flow, it should be massive.
That's it right there. Yep.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And I'm sure Gary Nolan and Lou Elizondo and those guys figured that out a long time ago. And they've also figured out probably what's attacking us and where it's coming from, and probably how to combat it, or not yet. And maybe that's what they're digging into. And maybe they're just trying to confuse us with UFOs and people, little green men,
I think it all
to keep
ties,
keep them
man.
off the branch,
Yeah.
of the shit that we really should be paying attention to. But I could be wrong.
I think that there's, to tap that for just a moment. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
and the other thing too, actually, there's another article. It's called "Brain to Brain Communication: The Possible
Yes.
Role of Brain Electromagnetic Fields," which I shot you a
Yeah. I
little
saw
while
that.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you have those stored. So those couple I gave you, those are good
Yeah.
reference points for that. And I think
Yeah.
that's exactly like you were just saying. It's what is kind of the potential, the possibility of what should be available to us as humans. Yeah, you can go into some real deep dives with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
like you and I've had the conversation about Promethean,
Mm-hmm.
Epimethean stuff, where,
Right. Right.
like for example, going back to the yeast thing,
Mm-hmm.
when Prometheus gave us, in my opinion, I'm going to put it out there flat.
Yeah.
The flame that he gave us was dimethyltryptamine.
There you go.
That's it. That's the
Mhm.
flame. That's the shock, the spirit, whatever, the soul, whatever you've got to put on that for a label that makes you comfortable. That's what
Yeah.
he gave us. That's what pissed Zeus off. The whole works. And one of the returns that Zeus gave, besides chaining Prometheus to the rock,
Was yeast.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Just to trap
exactly.
us all down, knock us back all
Right.
down.
So yeah, real quick, that was an Epimethean thing.
Mhm.
So, because Epimetheus was kind of a bonehead,
Mhm.
and for lack of a better way to say it, and he um, was lacking a wife.
Mhm.
And Zeus and his whole crew of gods up there, they were like, you know what? Let's do this because Prometheus, pissed us off so bad. Let's get his brother too. And Prometheus he knows what the gods are up to.
He
And
does
I think he's trying to get Hercules to go warn Epimetheus about not accepting this gift from
Mhm.
Hermes when he brings it down. But what had happened with Zeus and all his crew up there, the other seven, they had put this person together, Pandora.
Mhm.
So you and I usually hear the translation Pandora's box.
Right.
Let's switch that to the correct translation. That's Pandora's vessel. So the
Mm.
body.
Yeah.
So they just jam all the curses, like all the problems in to this Pandora. And then Zeus is like, hey,
Here's your wife.
Hermes, yeah, take this on down to Epimetheus. And then that's his wife now. And it was listed when it's actually discussed in the texts that talk about it. It was listed as a curse from Zeus against men who eat bread. I mean, how much more fucking obvious do you need to get? And that's, so you've got these little hints here and there,
I like
where
bread.
we're being,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
anymore.
lie to you, dude. I
Yeah,
stopped
yeah.
eating yeast 2 years ago, and I do not miss it. That's just
Yeah.
me, and that was outside of my own concerns. Now that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
other people have done that. I do like bread, man. I miss my pizza. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna joke, dude. Like that
I
was
know.
probably half of what got me here, though. you know. So that's the thing is, we've got this recurrent theme over and over and
Yeah,
over. There's like the
yeah.
bread, the yeast, the beer thing. All these other warnings all through the Abrahamic religions, and even before that, when you get to staying pastoral, for
Mhm.
example, which is a big
Mhm.
thing with the Sethianism, versus
Yeah.
and I have a bunch of historical tie-ins with that, but like the Seth, Cain, Seth, Osiris, it's all tied together.
Same.
And
Yeah.
Seth was the pastoral one, right? He was the one that stayed out in the desert and stayed
Mhm.
pastoral. He was representing the red lands and
Mhm.
all that stuff. But when you look at the historical aspect of that pastoralism, and you track from Morocco to where some of them landed first when they left after that flood,
Mhm.
one of the first places they land is actually all the way up in Norway region.
Oh, there you go. Mhm.
9,000 years ago, the Sami. So the Sami people, who are pastoral,
Mhm.
they tend reindeer herds and so forth for survival, and they've been up there since 9,000 years ago. Their genetics track directly back to Taffero.
There you go.
Directly. So that's, and that's the thing, is you see these warnings, and they're all in there. So maybe it's time to pay attention.
Oh,
Not telling
yeah.
you not telling anybody how to run their life, but you can see from my example and the 300 or 400 of us that are kind of alongside each other with this, that it's like there's something happening here.
Yeah.
Something strange is happening here that I think needs a little more attention than just like, oh, here's your athlete's foot medication. So yeah.
Dude, thank you so much for taking the time to chat, man. We definitely got to do this again. I'm sure there's another 2 hours we can get into just all these little tangents we can just run down and just
Oh yeah.
chase them down for the end. But thanks, man. Thank you
Yeah.
very
Yeah, it was
much.
great. Thanks for having me on, John. I appreciate it.